Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. An afternoon like any other. But no one knew that within the next 30 minutes, an elementary school teacher would face something she had never dared to imagine in her life. The late afternoon sunlight spread across the Greenwood schoolyard like a light blanket covering every step of the students. Laughter, the sound of backpacks dragging on the ground, the calls to each other, all created a lively and cheerful music. Parents came to pick up their children, one by one, jostling each other through the iron gate that was always open at the end of school. They greeted each other, talked briefly, and then left, holding hands with the little children who were telling them about their day at school. Teacher Sarah Coleman stood in the middle of that scene, like an indispensable part. At 32 years old, Sarah had been teaching for nearly a decade, and not a day had passed without her observing her students, not only in class but also when she handed them back to their parents. She was tall and slim, with light brown hair tied back in a bun, a soft voice, and eyes that were always filled with concern. Sarah was trusted by the parents at school and loved by the students. But today, in that seemingly peaceful moment, something went wrong. A stranger walked toward the gate, in a dark leather jacket, baseball cap covering half of his face. The face was unfamiliar, at least to Sarah, but he introduced himself calmly. "I'm here to pick up Ava." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Ava? Ava Taylor from 1C. The petite girl with curly hair who ran into her mother's arms like a baby squirrel every afternoon after school?" Sarah glanced down at the parent verification app. The information matched. Name, photo, ID, everything was valid. But Ava didn't move. She stood a few feet away, clutching the strap of her backpack, eyes wide, face pale. There was no cheer, no rushing footsteps. There was an awkward silence. Sarah leaned down and said softly, "Ava, are you okay?" The girl shook her head very slightly. Then she whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear, I don't want to go home." Sarah's heart sank. The words so small and heavy sounded like alarm bells in her head. No first grader would say that at the end of the school day, unless something was seriously wrong. The man stepped forward, placing his hand on Ava's shoulder. "Come on, honey, your mother is waiting." His voice was deliberately warm, but Sarah heard something else. An awkwardness, a rush, and the look no familiarity, just control. Sarah pursed her lips. Maybe she was just being too sensitive. Maybe not. "Could you wait a moment?" she asked, pulling Ava closer. "We usually check against the information from the classroom." The new procedure, the man frowned, but then she nodded. As he turned away to check his phone, Sarah asked Ava quietly, "Do you know who that person is?" Ava just looked at her, saying nothing, but her eyes were pleading. Sarah swallowed. She couldn't stop him from picking up the girl. The school app confirmed her identity. But her intuition as a teacher who had worked in 3 states and had dealt with more than her share of troubled families told her that there was a terrible truth lurking beneath the legal facade. A truth she didn't want to believe was real. The gray SUV pulled out of the parking lot, swirling dust in the afternoon light. Ava sat inside, turning to look back at her through the window, a look that made Sarah unable to stand still. She picked up her phone, locked the classroom, and climbed into her car. She didn't know what she would see. She only knew that there were silent voices that no one else could hear except Sarah. And this time she wouldn't ignore them. The gray SUV turned off campus, disappearing into the thinning traffic on Greenwood Avenue. Sarah gripped the wheel, her heart pounding, her eyes fixed on the license plate ahead. She kept a comfortable distance, not close enough to be noticed, but not too far enough to lose sight of her. The sun was setting behind the trees, the warm yellow light starting to fade into the hazy orange of twilight, bathing the town in an indescribable gloom. She had never done this before. Sarah wasn't a detective. She was just an elementary school teacher who usually spent her evenings grading papers, filling out grade books, and reviewing activities for the next day's class. But today every sense was on alert, and Ava, the girl with the frightened eyes, was still in the SUV. The car turned left, then right, not toward the residential west side where Sarah knew Ava lived with her mother. Instead, it sped away from downtown, into the northern suburbs where the houses were sparse and the streetlights weren't even on. Sarah frowned. She'd been teaching in Greenwood long enough to know this road didn't lead to any residential areas. As she drove farther, the scenery changed. The familiar little coffee shops, bookstores, and bakeries disappeared. Instead, there were fields of tall grass, trees growing thickly along the sidewalks, and old houses, some with faded for sale signs. It was like being transported into another world, a world that was quiet, forlorn, and strange. Sarah stepped on the gas lightly as the SUV slowed. Her heart clenched as she realized where she was going. A narrow, gravel path led deep into a clearing between tall trees. At the end of the path, a two-story wooden house appeared, paint peeling, windows broken, the porch tilted to one side as if a strong wind could knock it down. Each window frame looked like the blind eyes of a creature that had been asleep for years. Sarah parked about 200 meters away, behind a low bush, turned off the engine, turned off the lights, stopped breathing for a second. The SUV stopped in front of the porch. The man stepped out, the faint light from the phone in his hand illuminating his face hard, rough, and inhuman, no longer polite or courteous. He walked around to the back seat and opened the door. Sarah held her breath. Ava was pulled out, not the way a father would gently greet his daughter, but the way someone hastily hid a package. His hand gripped Ava's wrist as if he was afraid she would run away. She didn't cry or scream, just a small shadow dragging his feet and bowing his head, grumpy, hurried, stiff. Those 3 words swirled in Sarah's mind as she took in the scene before her. She hoped it was all a big misunderstanding. Maybe the man was Ava's relative. Maybe this was the cottage. Maybe, but her instincts didn't believe it. Sarah slowly opened the car door. A cold wind blew in, carrying the musty smell of wasteland and rotting grass. She stepped out gently, following the edge of the woods, avoiding the broken branches that might make noise. When she was only 50 yards from the cottage, she hid behind a large tree trunk, its bark rough and green with mold. The dim light inside the cottage suddenly turned on. A ceiling light flickered. Through the rotten wooden window, Sarah watched as the man dragged Ava inside, pushing her down into an old chair. For the next few seconds, Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. He pulled out a roll of duct tape. She tried to back away, but not fast enough. One hand held Ava's shoulders, the other taped over her mouth. Then, with rope, he tied her hands to the chair. Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes blurred. There was no sound of wind, no sound of cars, only the pounding of blood in her head. Inside the house, a 7-year-old girl was tied up like a commodity. The man pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and began to speak. Sarah couldn't hear it all, but one phrase hit her like a thunderbolt. Delivery tonight. She's ready. Delivery. Tonight. She's ready. Sarah's heart broke. This wasn't a relative, not a father. This was a trafficker, and Ava was just another commodity in that cold system. She backed away, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped the phone. She opened the camera, took a few quick photos, then switched to recording. She needed proof. She needed verification. She needed to save Ava. But most importantly, she needed to do it now before it got completely dark, before the actual delivery happened. Sarah crouched even lower, her heart pounding in her ears, every beat filled with tension and anger. She hid behind a mossy tree trunk, the distance between her and the house now less than 20 meters. The wooden door in front of her was not closed, leaving a narrow gap through which pale yellow light spilled out into the twilight. The night wind was starting to get chilly, carrying with it the dampness of earth and the rotting smell of fallen leaves. But Sarah felt nothing but the shiver of adrenaline coursing through her. She carefully tiptoed until she could see the scene inside. Through the gap in the rotten wood, what Sarah saw made her whole body numb. Ava was tied to an old wooden chair in the middle of the dusty room, her back arched as if trying to shrink away from the rope that was cutting into her small wrists. A strip of silver tape was tightly stuck to her mouth. Her face was wet with tears, her eyes wide open, wet and desperate. Ava's gaze accidentally caught Sarah's through the gap in the door. For a moment, she blinked, as if pleading silently. Sarah had to bite her lip hard to keep from sobbing. The strange man stood with his back to Ava, pressing the phone and talking evenly, as if this was just a familiar transaction. His voice was low, but each word that came through the door was enough to make Sarah shiver. She's still here. Good. No trouble. Delivered tonight as promised. Yeah, like the one from the other day. Like the one from the other day. The words were like a cold hook that hooked into Sarah's heart, pulling her down into the abyss. It wasn't the first time. She realized this wasn't a random kidnapping. It wasn't a lone psychopath. It was a system, a line, a machine that was crushing little voiceless children. Sarah crouched down, her hand tightening on the phone. She pressed record, bringing the camera close to the crack in the door and capturing the man's face even though he was bowed. Some angles were clear enough. She pressed record even as her heart felt like it was about to burst. She had to act. But how? Call the police. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, then paused. If she called from here, the voice of the operator or even the ringing of the phone might alert the man. She needed to find a safer place. She backed up a few steps, trying not to make a sound, and found her car. As soon as she was out of sight of the house, Sarah called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice was shaky but firm. My name is Sarah Coleman. I'm near Old Creek Road, north of Greenwood. I've just observed a man posing as a parent kidnapping my student. She's tied up in an abandoned house, and I believe this is human trafficking. I have photos, audio, and GPS. She spoke quickly, as if Ava's fear was powering her. The operator asked for her location. Sarah immediately sent a GPS ping and transmitted whatever evidence she had. We've sent a task force. Keep your distance and don't go it alone, Ms. Coleman. Sarah hung up, but her heart was pounding. Ava was still tied up, still sitting there, and the man was about to leave. She looked toward the house. Inside, the man was packing a few things into a backpack, checking his phone, and heading out the back door. Maybe he was about to leave. Maybe he was taking Ava somewhere else. The police wouldn't arrive in time if she didn't stall for time. She knew she was about to do something dangerous, but the look in Ava's eyes just now made it impossible for her to turn away. Sarah pulled out the iron pen from her bag, the one she used to take notes in her student notebook. Then she picked up a small rock and threw it at the old iron gate about 10 meters away from the house, making a clear clang. The man inside stopped. He turned his head, walked quickly onto the porch, his eyes looking around, the flashlight in his hand sweeping over the bushes. Sarah hid behind a pile of rubble, holding her breath. After a few seconds, he turned on his phone light and walked toward the sound. Sarah took the opportunity to cross the backyard, climbing over the broken windowsill into the house. The cold wind blew in her face, carrying the smell of dust and metal. Ava was still sitting there, her whole body trembling. The girl saw her, her eyes wide with surprise and hope. Sarah walked over quickly and whispered, "I'm here. It's okay, I'll get you out." She pulled out a paper cutter from her pen and cut the rope around Ava's wrists. Then she slowly removed the tape from her mouth. Ava burst into tears immediately, trying to hold back her sobs. Sarah hugged her and whispered, "Hush, just a little longer. The police are coming." Footsteps sounded behind her. Sarah turned around. The man was back. His eyes flashed with surprise, then turned to fury. "Who are you?" Sarah pulled Ava to her feet, blocking her way. Nothing in his hands, only his instincts as an adult to protect a child. But before he could take another step, a police siren blared through the night air. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Windows flashed. Radios blared. The police were closing in. The man tried to turn and run out the back door, but an officer was there, tackling him to the floor. He struggled, cursing, but seconds later his hands were cuffed behind his back. A female officer ran over, scooped Ava up, and held her shivering in the emergency blanket. Sarah sank to the ground, her arms still around Ava, her body drenched in sweat and tears. She hadn't let Ava go, and now she no longer doubted her instincts. The sirens echoed through the night like a wake-up call. But for Sarah, every second was a battle. Even though the police were closing in, she knew if the man got Ava out of the house before they did, things could spiral out of control forever. After recording and sending the evidence, Sarah quickly bought time. She snapped a few more photos, close-ups of the man's face, Ava's bindings, even the license plate of the SUV parked in front of the house. She sent them all to the operator, along with the current coordinates. They responded quickly. Patrol is on the scene. Just keep a safe distance. Safe? Sarah looked at the small window where Ava was still tied. Her little shoulders were shaking. The safe they were talking about was minutes away, but she didn't have minutes left. She knew she had to do something now. Sarah scanned the area. The house had a back door, lit by a bare bulb hanging loosely inside. The man was still pacing inside, talking on the phone, apparently checking the time and the money. Don't be late like last time. I won't keep her for more than an hour. Sarah shivered. She bent down, picked up a small rock from her feet, and aimed it lightly at the corner of the house opposite a pile of rusted metal and old beer cans. She threw it hard. Knock! The sound rang out, deafening, echoing through the silence. Inside, the man was instantly startled. What? He muttered, and walked out the back door, flashlight in hand, his gaze scanning the darkness between the bushes and the trash. Sarah held her breath, counting the seconds. When the footsteps faded, she crossed the yard and slipped through the open back door. The house smelled of old dust and rotten wood. The ceiling light flickered, creating nightmarish flickering light and dark. Ava was still sitting there. She flinched when she heard the noise, but when she recognized Sarah, her eyes lit up, tears welled up. Miss Coleman? Those eyes whispered. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pulled a small knife from her notepad and quickly cut the ropes. Ava winced as the rope around her wrists was removed, but she didn't make a sound. Sarah gently peeled the tape from her mouth. You're here. I'm safe. The words rang out like a talisman. Ava immediately burst into tears, her small body throwing itself into Sarah's arms. Auntie, I was so scared. I thought no one would see me. Sarah tightened her arms around her, her eyes brimming with tears, but her voice calm. Shedge, it's okay. I'm not leaving you. But they didn't have much time. Sarah knew that. She quickly pulled Ava to her feet and whispered in her ear, We have to get out of here. The police will be here soon, but we have to get out first. They crept along the rotten wooden hallway, avoiding the light. Sarah heard the man's footsteps returning, the soft bang of the back door, and a suspicious murmur. That's strange, it must be a weasel. But then he stopped. What? His voice suddenly became harsh. He realized Ava was no longer where she was. Sarah grabbed Ava's hand and whispered, Run. They dashed toward the front door, the half-opened. Rotten wooden door was the only way out, but his footsteps thundered behind them. He spotted them. Stop, he shouted like a storm of anger. They rushed out the door, just as he lunged at them, his hand almost touching Ava's shoulder. Sarah pushed the door open, then used all her strength to push back a wooden board blocking the exit, buying precious seconds. They ran across the yard, into the tall grass ahead. Sarah's breath was ragged. Her heart felt like it was about to explode. Ava gasped, her little feet tangled in the grass but still clinging to her. Behind her, the man roared angrily. Then his footsteps slowed, the flashlight scanned the darkness unsteadily. And then, the siren sounded. From the end of the path, flashing red and blue lights appeared, shining directly at the abandoned house. For police cars rushed in, officers jumping out of them, weapons ready. A rapid response helicopter roared into the night sky. Police here. Drop your weapons. Hands up. The man froze in the backyard with no way out. But within seconds, he was tackled to the ground by two officers, his hands tied behind his back. He cursed and screamed, but no one paid any attention. Sarah and Ava were picked up by a female officer, who pulled an emergency blanket over her shoulders. Ava cowered but held Sarah tight. Another officer stepped forward, speaking softly. We have the audio and video. You saved her life. Do you know that? Sarah nodded. She leaned down, kissed Ava lightly on the forehead, and whispered she was never alone. You heard what others didn't see. In the flashing lights of the police car, Sarah stood there, her face weary, but her eyes brighter than ever. For this time, she had been right to trust her instincts. And this time, a child had come back from the edge of the abyss. A soft sound behind her made Sarah turn. The man had turned. For a brief moment, his eyes met her shock, rage, and animal instinct all at once. Without a word, he lunged. Sarah grabbed Ava's hand and ran toward the wooden stairs at the back of the house. They passed the cobwebbed kitchen, where every chair and every cupboard was tilted and rotted. Each step made a terrifying creaking sound, but she had no choice. Behind her, the man's footsteps followed, the sound of broken wood like a hammer hitting her brain. There were only a few steps left to go up the stairs. Ava trembled, almost falling when her foot slipped on the mold. Sarah pulled her up in time, pushed her up, and then rushed after her. Their breathing was rapid, each step tearing the air apart. The smell of mold, old paint, and the cold from the broken doors mixed together, making the space even more stifling. Above her head, the rickety ceiling seemed to sway with each step. The stairs groaned as if they were buckling under their weight. Sarah could hear the man at the foot of the stairs, taking each step quickly. She didn't need to look to know he was getting closer. The second floor was nothing but a narrow hallway and rooms that had been uninhabited for a long time. The walls were peeling, the wooden doors were off their hinges, and the floor was stained with old water stains. Sarah pushed open the door to the first room, but the rusted lock wouldn't budge. She turned, pulling Ava into the next room. It opened a mostly empty room, with only a few planks piled in the corner and a broken window leading to the porch outside. Sarah pulled Ava in, gently shutting the door, then pressed them against the wall, huddled in the shadows. His footsteps stopped in the hallway. Sarah could hear his breathing heavy, labored. He was listening. She put her hand over Ava's mouth, so scared that every muscle tensed. The seconds seemed like hours. The wood creaked underfoot. He moved closer. His hand swept along each door, pushing hard, opening each one. The door next to hers made a creaking sound on its hinges. Then footsteps entered the empty room. Then came the soft squeak of the door where the two were hiding. The gate had opened. The flashlight swept around. For a moment, the light hit Sarah. She reflexively shielded Ava with her body, her eyes meeting the man's again. There was no doubt he saw them. Footsteps rang out. He lunged forward. Sarah turned, grabbed Ava's hand, and pulled her toward the broken window. The space outside was a sloping tiled roof, covered with green moss and stagnant water. One slip and she could fall from the second floor to the rocky ground below. But she had no choice. Sarah helped Ava through the window first, then climbed after her. Her feet slipped on the wet moss, but her hands still held tightly to the rotten wooden frame. She screamed in her head, "Don't fall, don't fall." Inside, the man let out an angry shout, then kicked the door open. She and Ava rushed along the porch, their feet slipping on the peeling tiles. The cold air hit their faces, the wind whistling past their ears like a cruel whistle. A thick darkness enveloped the surroundings. Only the sound of his footsteps chasing closely behind was clear. A dry branch poked up from behind the roof, and Sarah used her hand to push Ava through. But when it was her turn, the man pounced. A rough hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back. Sarah lost her balance, slipped, and one side of her body rolled off the edge of the roof. In that moment, Ava turned around, eyes wide, clearly visible. Sarah used all her strength, hooking her fingers into the edge of the roof, keeping her upper body from falling. The man lunged forward, trying to pull her back, but at that moment, the bright light from the headlights shone directly into his face. The police sirens sounded again, screaming as if tearing through the night. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. From the yard below, a series of footsteps rang out, rumbling. An officer's voice shouted, short and unmistakable, "Hands down." The man raised his head, panicked. But it was too late. A police officer had climbed onto the roof from behind, aiming his flashlight and weapon at him. The man jerked away, letting go of Sarah, turning to run, but only getting a few steps before he was restrained. Sarah was pulled up by another officer, her body cold, her clothes dirty, but her eyes still on Ava, who was wrapped in an emergency blanket in the yard. Safe, alive, trembling, but no longer bound. She breathed out the first time in nearly an hour. 2 officers led the man past. He was bowed, his hands cuffed behind his back, his clothes stained with blood and dirt. His ragged breathing was now just a faint background noise, no longer threatening. Sarah sat down on the steps of the abandoned house. Now the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated her and Ava. The scene was chaotic, noisy, but there was something quiet and still like it was over. Ava pulled away from the paramedics and ran to hug Sarah. There were no words to say. The hug was enough. A glimmer of light broke through the thick clouds of the late night. It wasn't dawn, but it wasn't absolute darkness either. Tonight, a teacher had acted, and a child had been saved. Though the cold wind of the late night swept through the empty street as the police car took Sarah and Ava to the station. The headlights were still flashing, but they no longer carried the urgency of the moment, but a different kind of light, the light of reassurance, a finality after a wild ride. Sarah sat in the back seat, wrapping Ava in a blanket to keep her warm. She had stopped crying, but her shoulders still shook slightly with each breath. Her red, puffy eyes were closed, and her hair was disheveled and spread across Sarah's shoulders. She stroked her hair gently, her hands still shaking slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe they'd made it through. At the Greenwood police station, a private room opened for them. Ava was checked over, and a social worker and a female police officer gently ushered her into the waiting room, carrying hot chocolate and an old teddy bear. Sarah sat across from an inspector with the name tag Lieutenant H. Alistair, a man in his 50s, stern-faced but warm-eyed, who looked like he'd seen more than one case like this in his career. He set the file down on the table, not saying anything right away. He flipped through the pages, then pushed it gently toward her. "He's not a relative of Ava's," he said, his voice even and slow. "Her biological father has been missing since she was 3. Her mother is a single mother, working the night shift at a hospital 30 miles away. She has absolutely no idea what happened this afternoon." Sarah was silent. She'd guessed something, but something inside her tightened at the confirmation. "He used false identification?" she asked. McAllister nodded, then pointed to the computer screen. There was a string of records from the school's parent management system. Everything looked legit, from the name to the photo to the ID number. But if you look closely, there are slight discrepancies. The birth date is off by a number. The photo is cropped unprofessionally. The email doesn't match any of the valid addresses in hospital or family records. "He knows how to get into the school's electronic system," McAllister said. "We suspect he's part of a larger network. There are signs that he's done the same thing in 2 other districts, but this time, thanks to you, it was stopped in time." Sarah stared at the screen, her eyes dry but her heart aching. "She almost disappeared," she said, her voice a sigh. McAllister didn't respond. He stood, handed her a bottle of water, and left the room to give her a few minutes of privacy. Sarah turned to see Ava standing in the doorway, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes were still red, but the tears had stopped. She walked slowly in, then, without a word, ran to hug Sarah. In that hug was everything she had been unable to say out loud all afternoon. Her fear, her helplessness, and the only trust she had placed in an adult who believed what she could not say. "I know you won't let me disappear," Ava whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and crying. Sarah held her close, feeling her chest heave with each beat. "I'm never alone," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "You always see things other people don't." Ava didn't answer. She just buried her head in Sarah's chest, her little arms wrapped tightly around her waist, as if afraid that if she let go, everything would disappear. When the social worker walked in a moment later and nodded, Sarah knew. It was time for her to be cared for properly, in the right place. Ava was taken to the intensive care unit, where specialists would help her begin the process of recovery. But before she left, She turned, ran over, and whispered a short sentence in Sarah's ear, almost to herself. "I'm not scared anymore, because I know someone sees me." Other words simple, awkward, but echoing like affirmations for Sarah's actions throughout the day. When the dust settled and Sarah walked out of the police station, there was no siren, no hurried footsteps. There was only the quiet night of a small town that had just experienced a subterranean earthquake. Not loud, but big enough to change the way people viewed the safety of children. She looked up at the sky, where a few stars were just peeking out from behind the thin clouds. The faint but persistent light reminded her that there were small things that could guide her in the darkness. But tomorrow, Sarah knew she would return to school with the same eyes, the same heart. But this time, her intuition would never be taken for granted, because there are things that, if no one looks closely, evil will always find a way to hide. By a week after that fateful night, the morning sun gently bathed the Greenwood schoolyard as if nothing had happened. The school gates opened to welcome students. Laughter rang out everywhere. Little shoes clattered on the red bricks, and warm morning greetings were exchanged as usual. But there was something different. It wasn't immediately obvious, but if one paused, one would see. The eyes were more attentive, the hugs from parents were a little tighter, and teachers, like Sarah, walked a few seconds slower to listen. Not just the words, but the silences that children often couldn't express. She stood in the same place as she had that day by the school gates, a list of students leaving, her eyes on everyone. But this time, when a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway, her heart sank. She was wearing the turquoise sweater her mother had mentioned in her year-end file. Her hair was combed back, tied with a pale yellow ribbon. But what made Sarah choke up wasn't her appearance. It was her smile, bright, real. And for the first time in a long time, no longer trembling, Eva ran toward her, stopped and raised her head. "I'm here," she said, a small but powerful affirmation. Sarah knelt down and hugged her. There was no need to ask, "Are you okay?" The light in Eva's eyes said it all. She was in the right place, in the right arms, at the right time. And she had returned from a place no one should ever be taken to. Sarah had continued teaching since that day. She hadn't changed much, still the gentle teacher with the soft voice, still patiently explaining difficult math problems or comforting a child who had fallen. But what had really changed wasn't on the outside. It was in her eyes. Those eyes, which had once witnessed a child almost being silently pulled from this world, now no longer missed any signals and unusual bow of the head. A child suddenly quiet, a hand shaking slightly when called by name. Sarah learned to listen not just with her ears, but with her intuition, something that had once saved a life. The story of her and Eva quickly spread through the community. Not as loudly as it had in the media, but enough for schools around Greenwood to review their entire parent identification process. Electronic systems were upgraded, layers of protection added. Supervisors and teachers were trained to recognize the signs of irregularities. Each of us became a more vigilant link in the child safety net. No one called it a miracle, but everyone was grateful that tragedy had not occurred. And Sarah, she didn't call herself anything. She didn't need titles. But one Friday afternoon at a closed-door parent-teacher conference at school, a mother stood up and said, choking back tears, "Ms. Coleman is more than a teacher. She is a light for children in the dark." After that day, that name spread the Lightkeeper. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she saw what others didn't want to see, believed what others didn't dare to believe, and acted when others hesitated. At the end of the school year, Ava wrote a little letter and left it in her teacher's mailbox. "Dear Sarah, thank you for listening to me, even though I couldn't speak. Now I can. I promise to always speak so that no one will be afraid like I was. And if I see anyone who can't speak, I will listen for them like you did for me." Sarah kept that letter forever. She knew that the world doesn't change with a single action, but a single momentary action like a bowed head, a decision to follow. A whisper of comfort can become a small flame, and those flames in the darkness are what keep hope alive. Sarah was still seen every day in Greenwood, with her report card, her little flowered tie, her gentle smile. But after that night, whenever her eyes fell on a child in the crowded schoolyard, Everyone knew no one would disappear into silence anymore, because there was someone who had learned to hear the whispers amid the noise. And that light is still burning. Story 2. In the winter of 2024, in Chicago, Illinois, a thick blanket of snow blanketed the suburb of Cicero. In a small apartment on the third floor of an old building, Thomas Carson, a 45-year-old air conditioning technician, couldn't sleep. The cold wind whistled through the window, carrying a dry cough from the next room. "Daisy?" he called softly, his voice filled with concern. There was no answer. Daisy Carson, Thomas's 14-year-old daughter, had been a bright girl with long brown hair that was always tied back before school. Her eyes, like those of her mother, Sarah, who had died in a car accident in 2020, had once lit up with joy, but now they were dull, as if the light inside her had been extinguished. Thomas stood up and walked down the dark hallway, the streetlights casting shadows on the old wooden floors. He pushed open Daisy's door and found her curled up on the bed, facing the wall, her skin pale in the dim light. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his voice soft. Daisy nodded slightly, not turning around, whispering that she was tired from her homework. Thomas sighed, looking at his rough hands. He had noticed a change in his daughter over the past few weeks. Daisy stopped talking about her drawings in art class, became withdrawn, ate less, and sometimes woke up in the middle of the night. He had seen bruises on her wrists, but when asked, Daisy had only smiled and said she had bumped into a desk at school. Thomas didn't believe her. He had lost Sarah, and since then he had been both a father and a mother to Daisy. He had learned to braid her hair, cooked her favorite pasta, and always ironed her uniform. But now he felt helpless. The next morning, at a coffee shop in Berwyn, Thomas met Henry Collins, an old friend from the trade school. Henry noticed that Thomas looked exhausted and asked what was wrong. Thomas talked about Daisy, his voice shaking, saying that he had seen signs of trouble but didn't know what to do. Henry pondered, watching the snowflakes falling outside the window, then suggested installing a camera to monitor Daisy, not to intrude but to protect her. He knew a man, Steve Ramsey, who installed security systems. Thomas hesitated. The thought of spying on his daughter made him uncomfortable, but the fear of losing her was greater. He agreed, his heart heavy. That night, when Daisy went to her tutoring class, Thomas took the equipment from Steve, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. Steve instructed him to install 2 small cameras, one in the hallway leading to Daisy's room and one hidden in a light bulb in her room. Thomas did everything carefully, full of anxiety. When Daisy returned, she ate a quick bowl of soup and closed the door. Thomas sat in the dark living room, looking at the camera app on his phone, listening to the ticking of the clock. Then, around 2 a.m., a small sound rang out, the sound of a window opening. Thomas opened the app and saw Daisy, wearing a black hoodie, climbing out the window onto the balcony. He held his breath, clutching his phone. Below the balcony, a young man wearing a motorcycle helmet appeared. Daisy ran down, jumped on the bike, and the two disappeared into the Chicago night. Thomas slumped in his chair, his hands shaking, muttering, "Where are you going, Daisy?" The fear was now real, sharp, and terrifying. He knew their lives had changed forever. In the days after the discovery from the camera, Thomas Carson barely slept. Every night, he sat in the darkness of his apartment in Cicero, Chicago, eyes glued to his phone, replaying the video of Daisy sneaking out the window and disappearing with a young man on a motorbike. The image of his daughter, small in a black hoodie, rushing into the cold night, was etched into his mind like an unhealed wound. Thomas wondered constantly, where was Daisy going? Who was that person? Why did the girl who dreamed of becoming an artist hide such a terrifying secret from him? He reviewed old video footage and found that Daisy had left the house 22 times in the past month, often at 2 a.m., returning late in the day, staggering, but sometimes leaning against a wall. The bruises on her wrists, which he had once thought were accidental, now appeared as a sign of something bad. Thomas felt claustrophobic, as if the small apartment were squeezing him. One morning at a coffee shop in Berwyn, Thomas met Henry Collins again. He briefly described what the cameras had recorded, his voice trembling but restrained. Henry, looking serious, suggested that they contact Kevin Gordon, a former police officer turned private investigator. Thomas nodded, though he was hesitant. He didn't want to believe that Daisy was in danger, but his instincts told him to act. Kevin, a thin man in his 50s, met Thomas at a diner in Little Village. He watched the video on Thomas's laptop, his eyes sharp. Without saying much, Kevin asked for more footage from the balcony to determine the route of the motorcycle. He said it would take a week and warned Thomas to prepare himself for the hard truth. Thomas squeezed her hand, nodded, determined to find out, no matter how painful. In the meantime, Thomas tried to keep things normal with Daisy. He made her breakfast of toast and eggs and asked about school, but Daisy answered briefly, avoiding his eyes. Once, when she accidentally touched her hand, Daisy flinched, pulling her sleeve up to cover a fresh bruise. Thomas pretended not to notice, but his heart clenched. He wanted to press her to tell the truth, but the fear of pushing her further made him hold back. The third night after meeting Kevin, Thomas got an urgent call. Kevin asked him to go to the notorious Englewood area of Chicago. Thomas put on a coat and cap and got into the car with Kevin, who covered his face with a scarf. They followed a familiar motorbike. Under the streetlights, Thomas recognized Daisy's figure sitting behind, hugging the driver tightly. The motorbike stopped in front of an old building with a red neon sign, Red Blossom Lounge. From the outside, it looked like a normal bar, but the loud music and the smell of cheap alcohol made Thomas shiver. Kevin signaled to stay calm and entered like a customer. Thomas swallowed and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was suffocating with cigarette smoke and orange light. Young girls, heavily made up and wearing short skirts, walked between tables, pouring drinks with forced smiles. Thomas saw Daisy at the corner of the bar, holding a bottle of wine and pouring a glass for a middle-aged man with a hungry gaze. She bowed her head, her hair covering her face, but Thomas noticed her trembling shoulders. The man laughed loudly, touching her hand. Daisy stepped back but did not dare to resist. Thomas clenched his hand, wanting to rush over and pull her away, but the gaze of a big man near the bar made him stop. In the meantime, Kevin signaled to leave. Outside, in the drizzle, Kevin explained that this was an illegal place that exploited young girls. Daisy was involuntary and could be manipulated or threatened. Thomas was speechless, feeling like his world was falling apart. He asked about the young man on the motorbike, but Kevin only said he was investigating and asked for patience. Rushing could put Daisy in danger. At home, Thomas did not sleep. He reviewed the videos looking for clues. A recording from the camera in Daisy's room left him speechless. In the dark, Daisy sat on the bed, listening to voice messages through her headphones, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Thomas realized that his daughter was trapped in a web she could not escape. The next day, Thomas went to the Cicero police station with a USB drive containing the videos. He met Amy Davis, a policewoman, who looked through the recordings with a cold expression. She said the videos were not enough to prove a crime and that more evidence of coercion was needed. Thomas left the police station, feeling helpless, like a rock pressing down on his chest. He punched the wall, blood seeping from his hand, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in his heart. That night, Thomas sat across from Daisy at the dining table, asking where she had gone the night before. Daisy dropped her fork, her face pale, saying she had just gone for a walk with a friend. Thomas admitted that he had installed the camera. Daisy was stunned. Tears welled up in her eyes. Then she ran into her room and locked the door. The sound of the lock sounded like a declaration of the growing distance between father and daughter. Thomas sat alone in the dark, feeling like he was losing his daughter. Under the Chicago streetlights, he told himself that he would not give up, no matter what darkness he faced. After the heartbreaking confrontation with Daisy, Thomas Carson felt like he was living in a nightmare with no way out. The small apartment in Cicero, Chicago once filled with his daughter's laughter, was now filled with heavy silence. The sound of Daisy's door locking every night was a reminder that the distance between father and daughter was growing. Thomas couldn't erase the image of Daisy at the Red Blossom Lounge from his mind, her shoulders shaking as she poured drinks for strangers, her eyes vacant, as if she had lost herself. He knew his daughter was trapped, but the police's helplessness and Daisy's silence made him feel like he was fighting an invisible ghost. Thomas continued to work with Kevin Gordon, a private investigator with a piercing gaze. Kevin dug deeper into the Red Blossom Lounge and identified the young man on the motorcycle, Matt Young, 19, who had been arrested for fraud in Indiana, but released thanks to a good lawyer. Kevin revealed that Matt targeted vulnerable girls like Daisy, exploiting the pain of losing their mother to manipulate them. He gave Thomas a file with photos of Matt hanging around the school. Looking at the photos, Thomas felt anger flare up, but he held back, knowing that emotions wouldn't solve the problem. Daisy became more and more withdrawn. She went to school like a shadow, came home, and closed her door immediately. Thomas noticed that she ate less. Her hands shook when holding a spoon, and new bruises appeared on her wrists, even though she always covered them with long-sleeved shirts. One evening, he knocked on her door but was met with silence. Thomas stood there, his hand on the doorknob, his heart heavy. He wanted to break down the door, hug his daughter, and promise to protect her, but the fear of hurting her more made him hesitate. Then one night, everything fell apart. Around 3 a.m., Thomas woke up with a strange feeling. He opened the camera app and saw that Daisy's room was empty. A small sound, like running water, came from the bathroom. Thomas walked quickly down the hallway, his heart pounding. The bathroom door was ajar, a faint yellow light streaming in. He pushed the door open and froze. Daisy sat on the floor, her shirt soaked, her hair matted. Water from the sink overflowed, mixing with blood from a deep cut on her left wrist. Her eyes were blurry, as if she had given up all hope. Thomas rushed over, holding her, wrapping a towel around the cut, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Daisy mumbled weakly that she couldn't take it anymore. Thomas picked her up, blood staining his shirt, and ran down the stairs, screaming for help. Mike Underwood, a neighbor who used to work as a security guard, heard and drove them to Mercy Hospital. In the car, Thomas held Daisy tightly, repeating that she would be okay. High at the hospital, doctors treated the wound. Fiona Allen, a female doctor, said the cut was deep, but not life-threatening. However, she warned that the old scars on Daisy's right wrist showed that this was not the first time she had harmed herself. She recommended intensive psychological care. Thomas nodded, feeling like a machine, unable to handle the pain that was taking over. Mary Evans, a psychologist, met with Thomas later. She listened to him talk about the Red Blossom Lounge, about Matt, and about what Daisy might be going through. Mary took careful notes, determining that Daisy was suffering from severe psychological trauma. She advised Thomas to continue collecting evidence to stop the perpetrators while creating a safe space for Daisy to share. Her words were like a spark, spurring Thomas to action. After Daisy stabilized, Thomas returned to work with Kevin. He began secretly recording audio and video at the Red Blossom Lounge, using Kevin's button camera. Those nights, he disguised himself as a customer, sat in a dark corner, and watched Daisy and the other girls work under dim lighting. He recorded Matt receiving money from Zach Arnold, the bar owner. Zach, with a cold smile, talked about controlling the girls. Each video cut Thomas's heart, but he knew it was the key to saving his daughter. One night, Thomas came home from the bar and found Daisy sitting in her room, clutching her sketchbook. She mumbled that if she told anyone, everyone would know, and she didn't want that. Thomas sat next to her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder, insisting that no one was allowed to hurt her. Daisy bowed her head, tears falling onto the page. She admitted to being threatened with a video but didn't go into detail, only saying that she was afraid it would destroy everything. Thomas left the room, his heart clenched. He watched the recordings from the Red Blossom Lounge again. A voice rang out, cold, Matt boasting about manipulating Daisy, making her believe she was helping him. Thomas clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He knew that to save Daisy, he had to break this network, no matter the cost. Under the cloudy Chicago sky, he promised himself that he would not stop until his daughter was free. The image of Daisy sitting on the bathroom floor, her blood mixed with water, haunted Thomas Carson every night. After that horrific event, he felt like time passed in a thick fog. Out at Mercy Hospital in Chicago, Daisy received medical care and began therapy sessions with Mary Evans, but she remained withdrawn, her eyes vacant, as if she were not ready to face the past. Thomas, exhausted as he was, refused to let himself fall. He knew that to save his daughter and the other girls from the Red Blossom Lounge, he had to act quickly and decisively. Thomas continued to work with Kevin Gordon, the private investigator who had become an indispensable ally. Kevin provides more information about Zach Arnold, the bar owner, a well-connected man who is not afraid to use threats to silence his rivals. Both the videos and audio recordings Thomas has collected show how Zach and Matt Young manipulate young women. But Kevin warns that the evidence alone is not enough to compel the police to act. A bigger push is needed, something that will get the public's attention. The idea to bring the case to light comes from Thomas's old friend Henry Collins. Henry introduces Ashley Turner, an investigative journalist who has exposed a scandal in Detroit. Thomas meets Ashley at a coffee shop in Logan Square, carrying 3 USB sticks containing videos, audio recordings, and detailed notes about what he witnessed. Ashley, a woman in her 40s with short hair and piercing eyes, scans the documents in silence. As the first video plays, a shaky image of Daisy pouring drinks in a bar appears, and Ashley frowns. She said the evidence was strong, but going public would put Thomas and Daisy under great pressure, possibly smearing or threatening them. Thomas clasped his hands, his eyes steady. He was not afraid of danger. All he wanted was to protect Daisy and stop people like Zach and Matt from hurting others. Ashley agreed to prepare an article, promising to put the story on the front page of the independent newspaper she worked for. She needed time to verify and protect Daisy's identity, but promised to go public with the truth. In the meantime, Thomas spent more time at the hospital with Daisy. She began to talk more in therapy sessions, although she still hesitated when mentioning the Red Blossom Lounge. One afternoon, Thomas brought Daisy's favorite box of cookies. She suddenly opened her sketchbook and showed him a picture. A girl standing in the rain, her eyes sad, but a tall man holding an umbrella for her. Daisy whispered that it was him. Thomas hugged his daughter, his heart both aching and warm. For the first time in months, he saw hope in her eyes. Meanwhile, Thomas and Kevin continued to gather evidence. One night at the Red Blossom Lounge, Thomas recorded a pivotal conversation between Zach and Matt, in which Zach admitted to using video to threaten the girls, saying that no one would believe a child. Thomas, sitting in a dark corner with a button camera, felt his blood boil, but he kept his cool. Each recording was a step toward bringing down those who had pushed Daisy into the shadows. At the end of the week, Ashley called Thomas to the press office. The article was finished with the headline dark in neon: "A Father Exposes Child Exploitation Network in Chicago." Ashley said the article would be published Monday morning, with the video edited to protect the victims' identities. She contacted a child welfare organization to get legal help for Daisy and the other girls. She looked at Thomas with respect, saying he had done what many would not dare. Thomas returned home, both relieved and heavy-hearted. He knew going public might invite retaliation from Zach and Matt, but he had no choice. The night before the article ran, he sat with Daisy in her hospital room. She was feeling better, though still weak. Daisy asked him, worried, what he was doing with the videos. Thomas held her hand and said he was giving them to someone who would help them, and no one would hurt her again. Daisy bowed her head, tears streaming down her face, saying she was afraid people would find out. Thomas stroked her hair and promised to be there for her. On Monday morning, Ashley's article made the front page of the article, spreading quickly on social media. The videos, with the victims' faces blurred, showed Matt taking the money and Zach making the threats. The public was outraged. Child welfare organizations and Chicago residents called for action. Under pressure, the Cicero Police Department reopened the case. Amy Davis, the officer who had rejected Thomas's complaint, faced criticism for her indifference. A special investigative team was formed to investigate the Red Blossom Lounge. That afternoon, police raided the bar, found evidence of illegal activity, and rescued 14 underage girls, all forced to work in harsh conditions. Zach and Matt were arrested, facing charges of child abuse and extortion. As Zach was led away, he screamed about protection rackets, but no one believed him. Thomas, standing outside the hospital, heard the news from Kevin on the phone. He felt no sense of triumph, only deep sadness for what Daisy had endured. That evening, Thomas sat with Daisy and told her what had happened. He said they couldn't hurt her anymore. Daisy said nothing, just held his hand. In her eyes, Thomas saw a small glimmer of light, not joy, but relief, as if a burden had been lifted. He knew the journey ahead was long, but for the first time he believed they would get through it. 3 months after the raid on the Red Blossom Lounge, spring 2025 came to Chicago, bringing warm sunshine and a gentle breeze. But for Thomas Carson, the city was no longer home. The streets of Cicero, once familiar with Daisy's laughter, now reminded him of dark nights and the pain his daughter had endured. After Zach Arnold and Matt Young were arrested, Thomas decided to leave Chicago, find a peaceful place where he and Daisy could heal and start over. They moved to Galena, a small town 160 miles northwest of Chicago, with cobblestone streets and quaint houses nestled in green hills. With money saved from selling air conditioning repair tools and support from a child welfare organization, Thomas rented a red-roofed house overlooking a vast wheat field. The house was small, but the large windows let in morning light, and the sound of birdsong replaced the din of Chicago's honking cars. Daisy, now 14, still bore invisible scars. She was thinner, her eyes sad, but the Galena air helped her change. In the mornings, she sat on the porch, sketchbook in hand, sketching grassy hills, oak trees, and sometimes herself no longer the girl shivering under the neon lights, but someone learning to smile. Thomas quit his job as an air conditioner repairman, took a job as a delivery boy for a local bakery, and learned to cook to make Daisy happy. Their dinners were simple pumpkin soup, homemade bread but filled with warm moments of father and daughter talking about small things. One morning, Thomas brought home 2 cups of hot chocolate. Daisy sat on the porch in a rocking chair, drawing. She asked mischievously what was he cooking today. Thomas laughed, joking that she wouldn't say no to his roast chicken anymore. Daisy laughed, a clear sound that melted Thomas's heart. It was a laugh he had feared he would never hear again. One day, Daisy took Thomas out into the backyard, where she pulled weeds. She handed him her sketchbook and opened it to a drawing. A girl standing in the rain, her hair wet, but a tall man holding an umbrella over her, his eyes gentle. Underneath, in small handwriting, it read, "Thank you for not giving up." Thomas looked at the drawing, his throat tightening. He held Daisy close, feeling her warmth. The drawing wasn't just a gift. It was a testament to the journey they'd made. A few weeks later, a letter from Ashley Turner arrived in Galena. The journalist wrote that Zach and Matt's case was still pending, but because of Thomas's evidence, both faced long prison sentences. The 14 girls rescued from the Red Blossom Lounge received psychological and legal support, and some testified against their abusers, including Ella Osborne, the sister of Brian Osborne, the waiter who had helped Thomas. Ashley concluded the letter, "You not only saved Daisy, you changed the lives of many. Thank you for your perseverance." Daisy read the letter, her eyes filling with tears. She asked if many people had really been saved. Thomas nodded, put his hand on her shoulder, and said she was one of them. Daisy smiled, a small but sincere smile, like sunlight through the clouds. She said nothing more, but the tight grip on her hand said it all. Mary Evans, the psychologist, stopped by Galena to check on Daisy from time to time. She noted that Daisy had made great strides, talking about her mother, happy days at the park, and her dream of becoming an artist. Those dreams were not lost, just folded. Thomas listened, feeling his heart heal. He looked out into the garden, where Daisy painted a new picture, a house in a field, with 2 figures standing side by side, their shadows merging on the ground. One evening, as the sun set, Thomas and Daisy walked along a dirt path through a field of barley. The chirping of insects mingled with the wind blowing through the trees. Daisy stopped, looked up at the golden sky, and asked him if he regretted leaving Chicago. Thomas looked up at the twinkling stars and said he had left nothing behind, because he had taken with him the most precious thing, her. Daisy took his hand, and they continued walking in a silent understanding. When Thomas got home, he hung the painting, "Thank you for not giving up," on the living room wall using only masking tape. The painting, with the father holding an umbrella for his daughter, became the focal point of the room, a reminder of love and sacrifice. Every night, under the light, Daisy's words lit up, like a promise that no matter the rain, he would always protect her. The story of Thomas and Daisy is a testament to the power of family love and perseverance. When the legal system is slow and the darkness seems endless, a father refuses to give up, shining a light of hope for his daughter and others. It is a reminder that no matter how harsh the world is, as long as one person dares to stand up, hope can still bloom. Story 3. In the 1990s, a young Indian man dreamed of donning a white coat and becoming the pride of his immigrant family in America. But as he came of age, he quickly learned that in this society, dreams alone weren't enough. Skin color and heritage were the true tickets to destiny. So he made a daring gamble. He posed as a black man to gain entry into a prestigious medical school. When the acceptance letter arrived, he thought he'd outsmarted an unjust system. Little did he know that audacious deception was merely the opening act of a tragicomic saga, where he would confront a bitter truth. Sometimes, bending the rules only leads to greater heartbreak and pain. Every late March and early April, America's Ivy League schools, the nation's most elite and storied private universities, send out their admissions decisions. Much like the announcement of university entrance exam results in Vietnam, it's a moment brimming with every shade of emotion. Elation for some, devastation for others. Social media overflows with jubilant videos of students opening acceptance letters, while comment sections buzz with congratulations, admiration, and wistful dreams of one day touching that Ivy League stardom. Yet, beneath the fanfare lies a quieter reality. Countless applicants who fall short. Few dare to share their moments of sorrow and rejection online, which only amplifies the illusion of universal triumph among the accepted. Amid this digital fervor, a tragedy quietly seized the public's attention. Andover News in Massachusetts reported on a Korean-American student named Lucas Lee. Lucas was a stellar scholar, a sky-high GPA, a near-perfect SAT score, accolades from extracurricular clubs, advanced placement courses with honors distinctions, a member of the school's golf team, and a dedicated volunteer in community service. Ironically, when it came to college applications, Lucas faced relentless defeat. He applied to every top 10 university in the U.S., only to be rejected by all. In the end, Lucas left a final message for his parents. "I am sorry." Then he left this world forever. After the heartbreaking news spread, Lucas' school confirmed the tragedy. In an email to students and parents, a school spokesperson wrote with grief, "We have lost Lucas, a beloved student. Our hearts are shattered." Though the official cause of death was not disclosed, Lucas' family permitted it to be known that it was his own choice. Friends took to social media, posting tributes to a brilliant, talented young man who silently bore crushing pressures. In the wake of Lucas' passing, public outcry targeted not only the academic pressures and neglected mental health of students, but also the affirmative action policies in college admissions, particularly at Ivy League schools. Originally designed with noble intent to combat discrimination and provide opportunities for candidates of diverse genders, races, and ethnicities, the policy has grown distorted under waves of radical progressivism and politically correct pressures. Admissions quotas, rigidly tied to race and gender, became a contentious issue. Not one too many, not one too few. Some schools even created separate categories for underrepresented gender minorities. This led many to feel that anti-discrimination had morphed into reverse discrimination against majority groups. The hardest hit? Asian American students renowned for their academic excellence. Why? In the race for Ivy League spots, Asian applicants were effectively placed in a death bracket, forced to compete at a higher bar, while Black and Hispanic candidates often faced a smoother path. In this brutal landscape, Asian students like Lucas had to fight fiercer than ever, and he, tragically, became a grain of sand swept away by the tidal wave of affirmative action. In such a climate, some Asian students opted for a different strategy. If you can't beat them, join them. A striking example is an Indian American man who, to secure a spot in a top U.S. medical school, transformed himself into a Black applicant and succeeded. That man is Vijay Jojo Chokal Ingham, or Vijay for short. Born in 1977 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Vijay might seem familiar to fans of American TV. His younger sister, Mindy Kaling, is a renowned Hollywood actress, writer, and producer, best known for her role as the confident, glamorous, and sharp-tongued Kelly in the hit sitcom, The Office. Mindy also created, directed, and starred in The Mindy Project. In 2013, Time magazine named her one of the world's 100 most influential people. Returning to Vijay's story, he was the quintessential model student in a typical Indian immigrant family. Compared to many other immigrant households, Vijay's family started with a winning hand, economic stability, academic pedigree, and intellectual prowess. His father was an architect, his mother an obstetrician. They met while working in Nigeria, married, and later immigrated to the U.S., making Vijay a first-generation Indian American. Deeply believing that knowledge changes destiny, his parents enforced strict academic discipline. Vijay's life revolved around school, tutoring, and extracurricular classes. He didn't disappoint, consistently ranking at the top of his class from a young age. But at age 11, Vijay tasted the bitter sting of so-called educational equity. His parents enrolled him to test for a prestigious all-boys private school in the Boston area, a school so elite that acceptance was considered 1 foot in the Ivy League. The competition was cutthroat. Vijay poured months into preparation, and his efforts paid off. He aced the entrance exam and shone in the interview with confidence and articulate answers. His family was certain the school's gates had swung open for him. Instead, they received a rejection letter. The reason? Vijay's mother recalled overhearing one of the 2 interviewers whisper during the process. Those words burned. What did "like him" mean? Wasn't it a veiled jab at discrimination? Furious, she confronted the principal, demanding justice. The principal, unruffled, explained, "We aim to admit students from diverse racial backgrounds to foster a culturally rich, varied learning environment. If we only looked at scores, our school would soon be filled with Asian students." Vijay's mother was livid, threatening to sue. The principal, unfazed, responded coolly, "Our admissions decisions are based on holistic criteria. You have no evidence of racial discrimination. Even if you took us to court, it wouldn't hold. And let me remind you, our school has deep connections in the education world. If you escalate this, it won't just affect your son. It could make things difficult for your other children at other schools." Swallowing their anger, Vijay's parents enrolled him in another reputable, though less prestigious school. For Vijay, beyond the sting of rejection, a harsh truth sank in. The lofty slogan of equal education for all races was a facade. Admissions weren't about scores, but about a palette of racial diversity. Schools didn't want the best students. They wanted a vibrant mosaic of backgrounds. Little did Vijay know that this early lesson would ignite a spark, forever altering the course of his life. Despite this setback, Vijay's high school years were largely smooth. In 1995, he graduated and earned a spot at the University of Chicago, a stepping stone toward his dream of medical school. Vijay's college life was a kaleidoscope of experiences. He joined a fraternity and was elected social chair, a role that sounded grand, but mostly involved decorating venues, stocking snacks and beer, collecting party cover fees, and handling odd jobs. Vijay, however, relished it. It was a chance to mingle with the campus's most charming women and, as he soon discovered, a gold mine. By his calculations, party entry fees were $5, while the cost per attendee was just over $2, doubling the profit. VJ took it further with a cunning ploy. Shortly after a party began, he'd have friends make anonymous calls to the police, reporting noise disturbances. Why? The hapless guests who just paid to enter barely had a drink before the cops shut things down. The leftover beer, snacks, and supplies? VJ sold them off. With such a calculating mind, it's no surprise that VJ later dared to challenge the entire U.S. college admissions system single-handedly. For 3 years, he reveled in college's party scene. But in 1998, reality dealt him another blow. A close Indian friend who'd applied to 15 medical schools received only 2 interview invites and was rejected by both. This friend's academic record far outshone VJ's. If a genius like that couldn't make it, what hope did VJ, a self-admitted mediocre student, have? Panic set in. VJ abandoned the party life, quit the fraternity, and buried himself in the library, studying day and night to salvage his grades. Despite his efforts, his GPA crept only to 3.1, well below the 3.5 minimum for medical school. His friend with a 3.7 had failed. What chance did he have? VJ's heart sank. Disillusioned, he began contemplating abandoning his dream of becoming a doctor, ready to settle for any job to get by. Just when VJ thought he'd hit rock bottom, another blow struck. His mother was diagnosed with cancer. She had spent her life quietly regretting that her Indian medical degree barred her from practicing in major U.S. hospitals, relegating her to small private clinics. On her hospital bed, she clasped VJ's hand, her eyes pleading for him to gain admission to medical school and fulfill the dream she'd never completed. With no way out, VJ nodded, though his heart trembled with dread. Less than 6 months remained to apply to medical school. For a struggling student like him, what could he possibly do? Back at school, VJ was consumed by anxiety, barely eating or sleeping. Then he overheard a galling piece of news. A former fraternity rival, whom he'd never liked, had just been accepted to Duke University's law school, one of America's most prestigious institutions. Jealousy and frustration surged within VJ as he grappled with a bitter truth. The rival's Polynesian ancestry from Hawaii qualified him as a native Hawaiian, granting him preferential treatment under racial affirmative action policies, smoothing his path to an elite school. The memory of his rejection from that private high school years ago, due to his ethnicity, flashed vividly in his mind. In that moment, a daring idea sparked. If he can do it, so can I. Wasting no time, VJ dove into the library, poring over admissions data from medical schools over the past 5 years. Quotas, average GPAs, racial demographics. He uncovered a pattern. Though each school varied slightly, the racial breakdown of admissions was strikingly consistent. Roughly half were white, 15% black, 12% Hispanic, and 2 to 3% Native American. VJ was convinced this was the rigid outcome of racial equity policies. Because Asian families often prioritized education, producing stellar academic records, the bar for Asian applicants was disproportionately high. Meanwhile, standards for black and Hispanic applicants were 20% lower on average, sometimes as 40% in certain states. From this perspective, VJ's 3.1 GPA wasn't entirely hopeless. The plan took shape, but the critical question loomed. Which ethnicity should he impersonate? He ruled out Native American, proving authentic tribal ancestry required airtight documentation, nearly impossible to forge. Hispanic was also off the table beyond a casual hola, amigo. VJ spoke no Spanish. Studying himself in the mirror, he often joked that his skin was darker than many black people's. But his thick, wavy hair and long, curled eyelashes unmistakably screamed, descendant of the Ganges. He bore little resemblance to the stereotypical image of a black person. Tight curls, broad nose, full lips. Undeterred, VJ took drastic measures. He shaved his head bald and clipped his eyelashes. Without his lush hair, he began to faintly resemble someone of African descent. To justify his choice, he told himself, all human ancestors migrated from Africa. Claiming African roots isn't entirely wrong. Before launching his blackface scheme, VJ stumbled across a cautionary tale. In the 1980s, an Indian American named Ramal Nobe posed as a black applicant to gain entry to Princeton University. He was exposed, not only rejected, but also blacklisted nationwide. His future ruined. Such a precedent might have scared others off. But not VJ. He wasn't easily rattled. Studying Rommel's case, he pinpointed the fatal flaw. Greed. Beyond faking his ethnicity, Rommel fabricated a national scholarship and siphoned funds from a leprosy treatment center to cover tuition, leaving too many holes in his story to go unnoticed. Learning from this, VJ resolved to keep his deception minimal. He checked the African American box on applications, but used truthful information for everything else. To further the ruse, he temporarily dropped his distinctly Indian first name, VJ, opting instead for his middle name, Jojo, on applications. Committed to playing the part convincingly, VJ embarked on a full transformation. Clothing, hairstyle, speech patterns, mannerisms, even his taste in movies and music, all meticulously modeled after African American culture. This was easier said than done. VJ studied black actors on TV and film, secretly observing and mimicking his black classmates. Yet, he still exuded an undeniable Indian essence. Fortunately, his girlfriend, a bit-part actress in the university's theater troupe, came to his aid. Though her roles were minor, she was well-versed in acting techniques. Like a scene from Stephen Chow's King of Comedy, she handed VJ a copy of Stanislavski's An Actor Prepares, urging him to study it rigorously, blending theory with practice to hone his craft. For a role model, she suggested rapper Eminem, capture his vibe, white skin, but a black soul, oozing cool. With clear guidance, VJ progressed, evolving from a 100% fake black guy to someone who only looks fake upon close inspection. Realizing he'd hit the ceiling of his disguise, VJ devised another tactic, to hide a drop of Tosset into the ocean. He decided to join the African American Student Association at the University of Chicago. It was the largest, most active group on campus, and crucially, its bylaws only required paying dues and attending events, no racial restrictions. Leveraging his knack for party planning, VJ generated side income. Guided by the principle of spend money to make money, he generously funded the association's events. His sudden emergence as philanthropic donor caught the eye of the group's president. Before VJ even formally joined, the president invited him for coffee. The moment they met, both burst into laughter. The president was a striking, tall, decisive black woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. As it turned out, she and VJ had taken a chemistry class together as freshmen, even working in the same study group. Reuniting years later in such an unexpected context felt like fate. VJ didn't beat around the bush. He laid out his plan to pose as a black applicant to get into medical school. The president frowned, her voice icy. "Isn't that straight-up fraud? And aren't you stealing opportunities from actual black students?" The conversation teetered on collapse, but VJ deployed his trump card: sincerity. "You know how it is," he said earnestly. "The world seems fair, but it's not. Under the protecting minority rights, they've created a system of subtle discrimination." He framed his scheme as a dual mission, not just to enter medical school, but to tear down the hypocritical facade of admissions policies, leveling the playing field for everyone, regardless of race or gender. Success would be a slap in the face to a sham system. Failure? He'd bear the consequences alone, ensuring no fallout for the president or the association. Moved by his impassioned speech, the president paused, then extended her hand. "Welcome to our African American Student Association. One condition: if your story becomes a movie, I want Halle Berry to play me." VJ grinned, knowing the money he'd invested was worth every cent. He'd previously joined the South Asian student group, where activities amounted to wearing colorful traditional clothes, eating, singing, dancing, and calling it a day. The African American Association, by contrast, was serious and pragmatic. Upperclassmen mentored younger students on academics, research, and test prep, while successful black alumni were frequently invited to speak, inspiring members to break through the ceiling imposed by race in education and careers. At one such event, VJ arrived a few minutes late, missing the speaker's introduction. The man's eloquence and commanding presence left VJ electrified. Curious, he whispered to the person next to him, "Who's that?" The reply, he used to teach in our law department. Now he's a Chicago city councilor, Barack Obama. Bolstered by the association's support, Vijay tackled the medical college admission test, MCAT. His score fell slightly short of the acceptance threshold, but compared to his 3.1 GPA, it was a marked improvement. With preparations complete, he faced the most nerve-wracking step, submitting applications to medical schools across the U.S. Could this Indian man, masquerading as Jojo the black applicant, fool the system and clear this hurdle? Per the process, Vijay used the American Medical College Application Service, AMCAS, a centralized platform where applicants submit grades and personal details for schools to review. He boldly checked African American under ethnicity. The trickiest part was securing a letter of recommendation from his university. As an Indian student at the University of Chicago, any discrepancy between his application and the recommender's knowledge could expose him. The fear kept him awake at night, convinced his plan was doomed. Luck, however, smiled on him. That year, an overwhelming number of applications prompted the university to establish a pre-medical office to streamline recommendation letters for medical school applicants. Students simply provided their personal information to the office. Vijay deliberately left the ethnicity field blank, but attached a certificate from the African American Student Association, verifying his active community involvement. A photo of himself, bald, dark-skinned, reinforced the impression that he'd merely forgotten to specify his race. He submitted his modest 3.1 GPA and MCAT score, and with everything in place, he waited. To his astonishment, interview invitations poured in over the following months, including from Harvard and Columbia. Could a simple checkmark on an ethnicity box transform an overlooked, mediocre student into a coveted prize for elite universities? Deep down, Vijay remained anxious about the interviews. Admissions officers weren't naive. What if they saw through his facade? But he soon realized he'd worried too much. In the U.S., questioning someone's racial identity, "Are you really African American or you don't look black?" was a social landmine. A single misstep could brand the asker as racist, inviting swift condemnation. Interviewers, even if skeptical, steered clear of the topic. Yet, an unexpected challenge arose at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. The interviewer required direct approval from the medical school's dean, a black man from Haiti. Upon meeting Vijay, the dean cut straight to the point. "How are you black? Be honest. Where are your parents from?" Panicked, Vijay bolted from the office, abruptly ending the interview. It seemed only magic could counter magic. While Ivy League interviewers didn't call him out directly, they later sent rejection letters citing various reasons. For Vijay, who'd been brimming with ambition, the rejections stung deeply. As Vijay navigated this double life, he began to viscerally understand the discrimination black people endure. While flying across the U.S. for interviews, he was repeatedly singled out for random airport security checks. On buses in unfamiliar cities, older women clutched their purses, eyeing him warily. Once, while shopping at a supermarket near the University of Chicago, a security guard stopped him, demanding to inspect his bag and verify the receipt for a case of beer. Yet, when Vijay was just an Indian student hosting fraternity parties, that same guard not only skipped the receipt check, but cheerfully helped load the beer into his car. As Jojo the black man, he was instantly suspected of theft. Vijay realized that posing as African American came with steep costs. Though he hadn't yet secured a medical school spot, he was already bearing the weight of prejudice, with his goals still out of reach. On the verge of abandoning his audacious plan, a beacon of hope emerged. St. Louis University School of Medicine, established in 1836, one of the oldest medical schools in the American West, renowned for its rigorous medical education and clinical training. Part of St. Louis University, SLU, it wasn't on par with Harvard or Johns Hopkins, but it was far better than nothing. Vijay mused that without affirmative action policies, he'd have had no shot at a school like this. When the long-awaited acceptance letter arrived, Vijay was overcome with emotion, tears of joy streaming down his face. He had finally realized the dream he'd nurtured since childhood, and the one his mother had entrusted to him. Yet, he never could have imagined he had entered medical school as a black man. Knowing he'd slipped through a loophole in the admissions process, Vijay resolved to start anew, studying diligently to prove his true worth. Intelligent and hardworking, his grades weren't stellar at first, but showed promise. Whenever professors or classmates probed about his background, he dodged with a vague, "I was born in Nigeria," brushing off further questions. Ironically, as if scripted for a dark comedy, his triumph unraveled into a tragicomic ordeal. By his second year, Vijay realized he didn't love medicine. Struggling academically, he contemplated dropping out, but bound by his lifelong dream and his mother's expectations, he pressed on. During clinical rotations, however, his resolve crumbled. Though his performance wasn't abysmal compared to peers, he noticed stark disparities in internship assignments. Vijay was consistently scheduled for late-night shifts no one wanted, tasked with grueling chores like cleaning or hauling heavy equipment. At first, he gritted his teeth and endured, but soon, he felt like a glorified janitor. He wrote a formal complaint, only to receive a curt response from the school. "As an intern, you must learn every task. We set the schedules. If you're unhappy, try another hospital. But remember, our region's hospitals are interconnected. Make too much noise and it could hurt your future." The words struck a chilling chord, echoing the high school principal's warning from over a decade ago. Vijay realized that racial bias wasn't just a white-to-black issue. It could also simmer between Asian and African communities. He'd thought himself clever for gaming the system, but the system had landed a silent blow. Reflecting on his conversation with the African American Student Association president, he recalled his lofty claim to expose the hypocrisy of affirmative action as a veneer for subtle racism. Yet, since entering medical school, he'd lost sight of that mission. At this juncture, Vijay's mother, after years battling cancer, passed away. In her final moments, she smiled, saying her greatest achievement was a happy family, healthy children, and a loving, responsible husband. Her second pride was her medical career. In all her years practicing, not a single patient had sued her, a feat even U.S.-trained doctors rarely achieved. She departed with no regrets. This profound loss reshaped Vijay and his sister's lives. Vijay came to see that true success was simpler than he'd imagined. Not tied to degrees, jobs, or wealth, but to living earnestly, free of regrets. Inspired, his sister Mindy, armed with $2,000, headed to Hollywood, determined to become the first Indian-American comedic actress. Vijay, meanwhile, took a bold step. He confessed to St. Louis University School of Medicine, admitting he'd falsified his identity to gain admission. In his later memoir, Almost Black, he recounted switching his major to healthcare management and deliberately listing his ethnicity as Asian. His application was promptly rejected, and the school demanded an explanation for the discrepancy in his admissions records. As a venerable institution, the school, likely to protect its reputation and Vijay, didn't expel him outright. Instead, they discreetly urged him to withdraw. Vijay promptly completed the paperwork to leave, walking away mid-journey. Yet he harbored no regrets. He was no longer Jojo the black man, but Vijay, an Indian American. A year later, Vijay self-studied and passed the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst exam, then enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Notably, UCLA is among the few universities that publicly oppose affirmative action in admissions, meaning Vijay's acceptance was based solely on merit. After graduating, he became a college admissions consultant and resume writer, helping thousands secure spots at top universities and land dream jobs. His services included resume editing, interview coaching, and other advisory work, perfectly suited to his skills. Yet, he always cautioned clients. During this time, Vijay penned Almost Black, chronicling his tumultuous journey. The story appeared in over 100 media outlets, including CNN, NBC, ABC, Time, Fox, and HuffPost. In the book, he critiqued affirmative action. Many readers, especially Asian Americans, left supportive messages, sharing their own experiences of reverse discrimination in college admissions and calling for an end to what they saw as a flawed, hypocritical policy. Yet, as the recent tragedy of Lucas Lee, mentioned earlier, reminds us, the road to reform remains long and arduous. Clearly, Admission to a prestigious university doesn't guarantee human potential. But integrity and excellence always set a baseline for success. Story 4. Once hailed as a future star in the world of League of Legends, Lee Chanju brutally murdered his girlfriend in a hotel room. The dazzling spotlight that once made him a focal point of admiration faded after a quiet retirement, giving way to a man spiraling out of control, suspected of public indecency. Bipolar disorder, illicit substances, and uncontrollable desires converged in room 6012 in just 10 fleeting minutes. What exactly happened in that moment? On the afternoon of May 30th, 2024, at a hotel in Ba Jin Square, Hanoi, Vietnam, staff were stunned to find a naked young man climbing the exterior of the 65-story building, showing signs of intending to jump. Thanks to the swift intervention of hotel security, he was rescued. However, he continued to wander aimlessly, unable to respond coherently to questions, visibly agitated, in a frenzied state, and repeatedly attempting to attack others. Faced with this volatile situation, the hotel had no choice but to alert the police. When officers arrived and verified the guest registry, they identified the man as Lee Chan-ju, a South Korean tourist staying in room 6012. But the real shock came when they escorted him back to his room, where they discovered a victim's body. The police immediately arrested Lee Chan-ju as the prime suspect. He quickly confessed to the killing, revealing the victim was his girlfriend, Park Hyun-ah. According to the autopsy report, the cause of death was asphyxiation from a pillow pressed over her face. Her forehead and face bore multiple contusions from blunt force trauma, and injuries to her abdomen and pelvis indicated she had been savagely beaten before her death. Notably, a 17-centimeter scratch across her neck suggested a fierce struggle as she fought against being choked. A large bruise on the inner left thigh hinted at an attempt by the suspect to commit sexual assault. Despite her desperate resistance, the stark physical disparity left her no chance, and she was tragically overpowered. As expected, Lee Chan-ju admitted his motive stemmed from Park Hyun-ah's refusal to engage in a romantic relationship. However, he later retracted this statement, claiming the true reason was his discovery that Park Hyun-ah had previously worked in prostitution, which made him feel betrayed. This led to a heated argument, and in a moment of lost control, he claimed to have unintentionally killed her. After committing this heinous crime, he fled to the hotel's 65th floor with the intent to end his own life, only to be stopped by hotel security. When police investigated Lee Chan-ju's background, they were astonished to learn he was once a professional League of Legends player, a celebrated figure in South Korea known by his in-game alias, Yaha-rong. After confirming the victim's identity and cause of death, the South Korean embassy in Vietnam promptly notified Park Hyun-ah's family. Her parents, reeling from the news, couldn't believe their ears. Just the day before, their daughter had called to say she was on a business trip. How could she have been killed in a foreign land? Suspecting a scam, they contacted local police to verify. Authorities confirmed Park Hyun-ah had indeed been murdered in Vietnam, and an investigation into the incident was underway. Hotel surveillance footage from 12:54 p.m. that day showed Park Hyun-ah and Lee Chan-ju checking in at the lobby, hand in hand, appearing like any affectionate couple on a vacation. Curiously, in several frames, Lee Chan-ju was barefoot, carrying his shoes in his hand throughout their movements. At 1:09 p.m., they took the elevator to the 60th floor and entered room 6012. No one could have predicted that this would be the last recorded image of Park Hyun-ah alive. When the door to room 6012 closed, an irreversible tragedy unfolded. Just 10 minutes later, Lee Chan-ju burst out of the room and bolted toward the hotel's rooftop. News of a former professional esports player killing his girlfriend in Vietnam quickly spread to South Korea, sending shockwaves through the public. Soon after, two even more staggering revelations emerged. Given Lee Chan-ju's erratic behavior, Vietnamese authorities suspected mental health issues and ordered a psychological evaluation, with results still pending. Additionally, a drug test revealed he tested positive for an illicit substance, though the specific type remains unidentified. Could these substances have directly triggered his actions? This question awaits further investigation and expert analysis from Vietnamese authorities. However, signs of Lee Chan-ju's mental health struggles had surfaced long before, with his condition deteriorating over time. For those familiar with League of Legends, the game needs no introduction. As a cornerstone of esports for years, it holds immense popularity in South Korea, bolstered by robust support from the government, media, and society. This has fostered a thriving esports ecosystem, giving rise to the Professional League of Legends Championship, Korea LCK. From this crucible emerged many legendary players, including the central figure of this case, Lee Chan-ju, a professional player from the 2000s generation, known in-game as Yeharong. Born on June 12, 2000 in Seoul, South Korea, Lee Chan-ju was captivated by esports from a young age. By his first year of middle school at just 13, he set his sights on becoming a professional player. Adopting the ID Yeharong, inspired by a greeting from the female protagonist in a popular Japanese light novel, he displayed prodigious talent from the outset. His only barrier to a professional career was his age, as tournaments, often broadcast live, required players to be at least 17. In high school, Lee Chan-ju devoted himself entirely to rigorous training, honing his skills at an elite level. Among over 3 million players on the Korean server at the time, Lee Chan-ju rose to the top ranks, showcasing undeniable potential. In 2016, as a sophomore, he dropped out of school. That August, he joined Keg Seoul as an amateur player. By 2017, upon turning 17 and meeting the tournament age requirement, he signed with Jean Air Green Wings, a team competing in Professional League of Legends. Taking on the role of starting mid laner, he was hailed by experts as one of the most promising young talents. Yet, his career was marked by turbulence. Due to shifting regulations and policies, JAG disbanded on November 17, 2020. In 2021, Lee Chan-ju was recruited by a prominent team, but was relegated to a substitute role, with little chance to shine. After the 2021 season, he left the team, leaving minimal personal impact. Frustrated by repeated setbacks in South Korea, he sought new opportunities in Japan. Starting in the 2022 season, he joined Detonatio and Focus Me, DFM, a top team in the League of Legends Japan League, LJL, as their primary mid laner. Here, Lee Chan-ju entered the peak of his professional career, delivering standout performances and etching his name in memorable matches deemed classics. He was even lauded by the media as one of the top 6 mid laners in the region. When asked about his feelings after winning his first championship, Lee Chan-ju exclaimed, "It feels incredible. Absolutely exhilarating." However, at the 2022 League of Legends World Championship, Detonatio and Focus Me DFM was eliminated in the play-in stage, with Lee Chan-ju performing well below his usual standard. His morale visibly shattered. After the 2022 season, his contract with DFM expired, and he did not join any other team thereafter. At just 22 years old, Yaha Rong, the mid laner once touted as a future star, quietly retired, stepping away from the esports world entirely. From a promising professional player, Lee Chan-ju plummeted into unemployment, with no foothold left in the competitive gaming scene. In 2023, during a gathering at a friend's house, he met a woman 9 years his senior, Park Hae-eun-ah. Born in 1991, Park Hae-eun-ah was deeply connected to her parents, gracious with friends, dutiful, and brimming with a zest for life. After studying abroad in Australia, she began working at a company in Busan. From their first encounter, Lee Chan-ju pursued Park Hae-eun-ah with fervent, almost obsessive passion. Her close friends were aware of this younger man, a former esports player with some renown under the alias Yaha Rong. By December 2023, though the couple never publicly confirmed their relationship, their everyday interactions left friends convinced they were romantically involved. It wasn't until April in 2024 that Park Hae-eun-ah first mentioned the relationship to her parents, describing a younger man pursuing her with intense devotion. Neither her friends nor family were concerned, trusting that Hae-eun-ah's maturity, composure, and discernment would prevent her from entering a relationship without careful consideration. Yet, some people present a flawless facade while concealing a volatile, dangerous life beneath the surface. In 2023, Lee Chan-ju had been diagnosed with bipolar I disorder, a severe mental health condition that also exempted him from South Korea's mandatory military service. Remarkably, this diagnosis came as a surprise, as he had shown no overt abnormalities during his professional gaming career. The diagnosis stemmed from an incident in April 2023, post-retirement, when Lee Chan-ju made headlines for erratic behavior tied to his condition. On April 15, 2023, in Seoul's Gangnam district, the owner of a nail salon received a booking call from a man asking if he could get a manicure and scheduling a visit. The call itself was unusual, as male clients were rare, but the salon owner thought little of it. The true shock came during the service. The client was extraordinarily peculiar. On April 16th, Lee Chan-ju arrived at the salon at 7 p.m. According to the owner, the manicure took about 40 minutes. Throughout, Lee Chan-ju made unsettling remarks such as, "It smells so nice, so soothing," delivered in an oddly soft, exaggeratedly coy tone, a mannerism in Korean culture that felt jarring and discomforting. The salon owner endured it, completing the service, but Lee Chan-ju showed no intention of paying or leaving. Instead, he grew frenzied, switching seats repeatedly, muttering incoherent phrases no one could decipher. At the time, only the owner and one other female customer were present. They exchanged uneasy glances, whispering, "What's wrong with this guy?" Then, Lee Chan-ju's actions escalated into outright terror. He abruptly climbed onto a salon treatment bed, swiftly stripped off all his clothes, and lay naked, his face radiating a disturbing satisfaction, resembling a perverse exhibitionist. The owner, frozen in shock, trembled as she warned, "Put your clothes back on immediately. This behavior is unacceptable here." Despite her pleas, Lee Chan-ju remained motionless, stark naked, unmoved by her words. Left with no choice, the owner called the police. Officers arrived swiftly, detaining Lee Chan-ju. The incident became a social news story, widely reported by media outlets, which highlighted his identity as a former professional League of Legends player, while withholding his real name. Subsequent drug tests came back negative. However, after police intervention, Lee Chan-ju showed no awareness of the gravity of his actions, even repeatedly contacting the salon to book follow-up appointments, all of which were firmly rejected. Friends later confronted him about the incident, but his responses were mooder. His explanations were muddled and incoherent, claiming he acted on impulse, driven by overwhelming excitement and uncontrollable urges. In later live streams, viewers noticed further abnormalities: slurred speech, glassy eyes, and incessant erratic movements. Post-retirement, Lee Chan-ju's increasingly bizarre and harmful behavior, coupled with significant weight loss over 2 years, prompted his family to take his mental health seriously. With their support, he was diagnosed with bipolar I disorder, a severe condition marked by delusions, impulsivity, loss of control, and intense manic episodes that can lead to unpredictable, even dangerous actions. His father revealed that in the 6 months following the diagnosis, Lee Chan-ju underwent outpatient treatment, requiring monthly injections. However, he vehemently resisted medication and therapy. During his first treatment, his father had to restrain him to administer the injection. It was during this treatment period that Lee Chan-ju met and ardently pursued Park Hyun-ah, eventually entering a romantic relationship. Whether Park Hyun-ah was fully aware of his mental health condition remains unclear. However, she confided to friends that Lee Chan-ju frequently exhibited rude behavior, lashing out unprovoked, and displaying other erratic tendencies, leading her to contemplate ending the relationship. Yet, she hesitated, pitying his apparent vulnerability and fragility. Unable to make a definitive break, treating mental illness requires long-term, meticulous care and unwavering commitment. But Lee Chan-ju consistently resisted both medication and therapy. After the crime, his father admitted to the media that their disagreements over medication often sparked conflicts. He also acknowledged lapses in oversight, allowing Lee Chan-ju to miss doses. This inconsistent treatment likely exacerbated his condition. On May 27, 2024, during a routine call with her parents, Park Hyun-ah sounded exhausted, though her family dismissed it as minor. In reality, Lee Chan-ju was entering the onset of a manic episode. In chat messages, Park Hyun-ah wrote, "I really don't understand what he's saying anymore." By May 28th, his mental state grew dangerously unstable, rapidly deteriorating into a severe, uncontrollable breakdown. Non-compliance with medication triggered delusions, culminating in an irreparable tragedy. At 9:58 p.m. on May 28, 2024, Lee Chan-ju, shirtless and barefoot, ran to a police station, claiming, "Someone keeps staring at me. I'm scared, so I came here for help." When asked who, he replied, "That person, the convenience store clerk." His speech became incoherent, jumping erratically, rendering normal communication impossible. Police contacted his father, who picked him up. By 4 a.m. on May 29th, Park Hyun-ah, concerned for her boyfriend, continued texting him, but his replies were chaotic, devoid of clarity or focus. Around the same time, Lee Chan-ju's conditions spiraled further. He texted his father, demanding, "Transfer money to my account urgently." His father asked, "Where are you?" Lee Chan-ju replied, "At the airport." His father responded, "If you're sober, come home." Only after sending this did he grow alarmed, frantically asking, "Where are you?" After being brought home from the police station, non-compliance with medication plunged Lee Chan-ju into severe delusions. He told his father, "There's an earthquake happening. If I fly and realign the Earth's axis, all earthquakes will stop." Fueled by this bizarre delusion, at 3 a.m., clad only in shorts and a t-shirt, Lee Chan-ju fled his home, heading to Incheon Airport to catch the earliest flight to Vietnam. Even as he reached the airport and texted for money, his father assumed it was mere delirium, unaware that his son's delusions had manifested into reckless reality. On the morning of May 29th, Park Hyun-ah, unable to reach Lee Chan-ju, was unaware he had traveled to Vietnam. She sent messages checking on him. At noon, he finally replied, "Sorry, I'm in Vietnam." Alarmed, she asked, "What's going on?" He provided his father's phone number, instructing her to contact him directly. His brief response came as, upon arriving in Vietnam, he was immediately detained by Vietnamese police. Upon arriving in Hanoi, Lee Chan-ju checked into a hotel, but struggled to communicate with the receptionist, mixing Korean and English in a way that left his requests incomprehensible. Frustrated by the lack of service, he erupted in rage, hurling his phone erratically. After lingering in the lobby, he abruptly bolted outside, vanishing without direction. Moments later, locals witnessed a bizarre spectacle. By the banks of Yen Chu Lake, near the hotel, Lee Chan-ju stood stark naked, motionless, staring intently at the water. Onlookers, alarmed by the scene, immediately alerted the police. Officers arrived swiftly, forcibly escorting him to the station. While there, Lee Chan-ju received a message from Park Hyun-ah, urging him to call his father. Whether it was the nude incident at the nail salon or standing exposed by the lake in Vietnam, Lee Chan-ju's bizarre actions consistently hinted at sexual compulsions. Before departing, he had borrowed 500,000 won, approximately $360, from friends to travel to Vietnam. When asked why he suddenly wanted to go, he claimed it was to relieve emotional stress. Following his initial detention, Vietnamese police contacted the South Korean embassy in Vietnam, informing Lee Chan-ju's father of the situation. Only then did his father fully grasp that his son was indeed in Vietnam. Park Hyun-ah promptly reached out to Lee Chan-ju's father, but a puzzling question arose. Why didn't his father, his own flesh and blood, travel to Vietnam to retrieve him? In a later media interview, Lee Chan-ju's father explained he was preoccupied with drafting urgent documents, preventing an immediate trip. He also advised Park Hyun-ah against going, fearing for her safety. Yet, their conversation suggested a different story. On May 29th, Lee Chan-ju's father texted Park Hyun-ah via a messaging app, "You need to go there and bring him back immediately." She replied, "What if I can't find him tomorrow?" He responded, "Don't agitate him. Stay in touch and don't mention the medication." This exchange reveals Lee Chan-ju's intense aversion to his prescribed drugs, likely a source of conflict with his father that drove him to flee. His father then instructed Park Hyun-ah, when you arrive, buy a bottle of Coca-Cola and mix the medication in it. 2 pills, ideally. Despite knowing his son's fierce resistance to medication, his inability to even hear it mentioned, and his abnormal sexual urges during manic episodes, Lee Chan-ju's father still tasked Park Hyun-ah with administering the drugs, seemingly oblivious to the dangers she faced traveling alone to a foreign country. Initially, Park Hyun-ah had planned to attend a job interview with a new company, but concern for her boyfriend's safety compelled her to prioritize Vietnam. Lee Chan-ju's father sent her money for flights and accommodations, urging her to go first while he assessed the situation. On May 29th, Park Hyun-ah told her parents she needed to make an urgent business trip to Vietnam. Given her job in international trade, they didn't question her. On the morning of May 30th, she boarded a flight to Hanoi. By noon, with assistance from the South Korean embassy, she arrived at the Hanoi police station and bailed Lee Chan-ju out. Intending to return to South Korea that day, she relented when he insisted on resting one more day. Agreeing, they checked into a hotel together, entering room 6012. Within 10 minutes, a tragedy unfolded. Throughout the incident, no clear signs pointed to prior conflict between them. One theory suggests Park Hyun mixed medication into a Coca-Cola, and Lee Chan-ju, discovering this, felt betrayed, triggering his violent outburst. However, given his past arguments with his father over treatment, none of which turned violent, this hypothesis lacks conviction. Yet, the bruise on the victim's inner thigh, indicative of forceful tearing, confirms Lee Chan-ju's heightened sexual agitation. It's likely that, back in the room, he exhibited extreme behavior Park Hyun-ah had never witnessed. He may have attempted to force intimacy, and upon her refusal, lost all control. This aligns with his initial confession. Rejection fueled his emotional frenzy, leading to the murder. Later, he altered his story, baselessly claiming the victim was a sex worker, a claim unsupported by any evidence. Park Hyun-ah's love and concern couldn't reach a man who had lost his humanity. Following the incident, Lee Chan-ju awaits the results of a psychiatric evaluation, while receiving medication to stabilize his condition. If the evaluation deems his mental state severe, he may undergo treatment rather than immediate imprisonment. As the crime occurred in Vietnam, international jurisdiction follows territorial principles, meaning Lee Chan-ju will likely face Vietnamese law. Additionally, his positive drug test introduces another layer, as the substance's influence remains under scrutiny. Officials from Vietnam and South Korea agree that Lee Chan-ju's extradition to South Korea is unlikely. Vietnam's investigation has yielded limited progress, and the motive behind the crime remains unclear. Park Hyun-ah's family has yet to receive an apology from the perpetrator. Lee Chan-ju's father insists his son's actions stemmed from mental illness or treatment drugs, downplaying the role of illicit substances. He dreads the possibility of his son facing execution in Vietnam, a country with stringent penalties for drug-related crimes. Whether Lee Chan-ju used drugs in South Korea before traveling, consumed them in Vietnam, or how he obtained them will significantly impact his final sentencing. If he brought and used drugs in Vietnam, he could face charges for both murder and drug offenses, potentially leading to life imprisonment or the death penalty. Story 5. In the eastern reaches of Australia, amidst the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, lies a tiny island called Norfolk, a place of breathtaking natural beauty where residents lead tranquil, isolated lives, far removed from the bustle of the world. But on one fateful day, the island's serene stillness was shattered by a horrifying discovery. 2 tourists exploring a renowned waterfall stumbled upon a peculiar object tightly wrapped in a black plastic tarp. As they peeled back the covering, they were struck with shock. It was the body of a woman, marking the beginning of a case that would rock the island, the Norfolk Island murder. Norfolk Island, nestled in the southwestern Pacific, spans just 8 kilometers in length and 4.8 kilometers in width, with a coastline stretching 32 kilometers. A remote overseas territory of Australia, it lies roughly 1,700 kilometers from Sydney, and is home to fewer than 2,000 permanent residents. Discovered in 1774 by British explorer James Cook, the island initially served as a penal colony for convicts and exiles. Over time, settlers arrived, transforming Norfolk into a small, tight-knit community steeped in history. Today, Norfolk thrives on tourism, welcoming tens of thousands of visitors each year. Despite its modest size, the island boasts a modern airport and harbor. While under Australian sovereignty, at the time of this story, Norfolk enjoyed significant autonomy. Its residents lived in harmony, known for their friendliness and lack of serious conflict. From 1893 until the events of this case, the island had maintained an extraordinary record, over a century without a single recorded homicide. But all that was about to change. On March 31, 2002, a Sunday bathed in the cool air of early autumn, Norfolk was suddenly engulfed by a heavy, unexpected downpour around 3:30 p.m. The rain lasted roughly 30 minutes before clearing, leaving the skies gradually brightening once more. At this moment, a group of tourists had gathered at Cockpit Falls, a striking landmark on the island's northern side. The waterfall's flow is unpredictable, but it's at its most stunning when cascading fiercely after a storm. By 4 p.m., the observation deck near the falls began to draw a crowd. At 6:15 p.m., two tourists, having admired the waterfall, decided to stroll across a nearby grassy area. Suddenly, they noticed a large black plastic bundle, its contents vaguely resembling a human form. Curiosity piqued, they approached to investigate. When they opened the plastic, the sight before them was chilling, the lifeless body of a woman. Panicked, they immediately called the police. Upon receiving the emergency call, Norfolk Island's police force sprang into action. With a resident population of under 2,000 and no murders in over a century, the island's police presence was minimal. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, local authorities swiftly contacted the Australian Federal Police, AFP, for assistance. A small team secured the scene, cordoning off the area while awaiting reinforcements from the mainland. The victim's body was tightly encased in a massive black plastic tarp, measuring 4 meters by 3 meters. She wore a black tank top and white athletic shoes. Her clothing, including her undergarments, had been deliberately cut apart. Her hair was matted with green glass fragments and smeared with patches of white paint. At the scene, police also recovered a broken wristwatch and a partially smoked cigarette butt. The forensic report revealed a staggering 64 injuries on the victim's body, including broken bones and severe lacerations. The fatal wound was a single knife stab to the chest. Notably, there were no signs of sexual assault. In the victim's fingernail crevices, examiners found DNA from an unidentified woman, which matched samples taken from the cigarette butt at the scene. Based on the injuries, the coroner concluded that the victim had fought fiercely for her life, with multiple wounds indicating defensive struggles. Intriguingly, the black tarp used to wrap the body yielded 10 distinct fingerprints, leading police to suspect the involvement of multiple perpetrators. Just 1 hour after the Norfolk police received another distressing call. The caller reported that his daughter had gone missing that day and urged authorities to help find her. On an island where incidents were rare, receiving 2 emergency calls in a single day was highly unusual. Suspecting the missing person might be the victim, police chose not to immediately bring the parents to identify the body, fearing the gruesome state of the remains would be too traumatic. Instead, they asked the victim's landlady to confirm her identity. Through this process, the victim was identified as Janelle Patton, 29 years old, originally from Sydney. Janelle was a vibrant, outgoing woman with a lifelong passion for music, having been an active member of her school band. However, during her second year of university, she dropped out for personal reasons. She later worked at a bank and navigated several romantic relationships, all of which ended in heartbreak. One particularly violent conflict with a boyfriend left her deeply traumatized. Though she later found new love and was on the verge of an engagement, that partner ended the relationship, citing incompatible personalities. Reeling from repeated emotional blows, Janelle battled depression and relied on medication to manage her condition. In 1999, at the age of 27, Janelle resolved to break free from the shadows of her past. Determined to start anew, she left her job in Sydney, bid farewell to painful memories, and chose the remote Norfolk Island as her fresh beginning. After saying goodbye to her parents, Janelle arrived on the island alone and quickly secured a job as a server at a small hotel. Life on Norfolk gradually began to heal her wounded spirit. She integrated effortlessly into the local community, rediscovering the joyful, dynamic woman she once was. Janelle was particularly fond of sports. She frequented the gym and took brisk daily walks to stay fit. Time passed, and soon Janelle had been living on the island for nearly 3 years. During that period, she returned to Sydney once to visit her family. Though her parents worried about her living alone so far away, they respected her decision. In 2002, during the Easter holidays, Janelle's parents flew from Sydney to Norfolk to visit her. That afternoon, Janelle met them at the airport. The family spent the day exploring the island, savoring its peaceful scenery and crisp air. By 9 p.m., Janelle dropped her parents off at their pre-booked hotel. Since she had work the next morning, they agreed to meet again at noon for lunch. But when the clock struck 1 p.m. the following day, Janelle was nowhere to be seen. Her parents, assuming work might have delayed her, refrained from calling, not wanting to disturb her. Instead, they left a note on the hotel room door. Unbeknownst to them, a horrific tragedy had already unfolded, and Janelle would never keep their appointment. By 2:30 p.m., Janelle's parents returned to the hotel and found their note still untouched on the door. Growing uneasy, they called her phone, but it rang unanswered. By 4 p.m., their concern deepened, prompting them to visit her home on Allendale Road in the island's southeastern area. Upon arriving, they found Janelle's car parked outside, but the house was unlocked. Inside, they checked every room, finding no signs of disturbance. Everything was in order. They asked neighbors, but no one had seen Janelle that day. One neighbor mentioned, "She has a habit of taking daily walks on a nearby road. You might check there." The couple searched the surrounding roads until 7:50 p.m., but found no trace of their daughter. Desperate, they called the police, unaware that just an hour earlier, a gruesome murder had been uncovered on the island, and the victim was Janelle, the very person they were searching for. The next morning, the investigation began in earnest. Police visited the hotel where Janelle worked, learning she had arrived at 7 a.m. and clocked out at 11:10 a.m. After leaving work, she stopped at a local supermarket to shop. Security footage captured her final moments at 11:16 a.m. In the video, she appeared calm, showing no signs of distress. At the store, she briefly greeted her landlady, exchanging pleasantries. The landlady later recounted that after finishing her shopping, she drove home and spotted Janelle around 11:30 a.m. on the same road. Minutes later, another witness, driving along the same route to sue the crying child, confirmed seeing Janelle walking alone in the same area. Around the same time, a resident on Rudy Hill Road recalled hearing a car stop outside his home between 11:30 a.m. and 11:40 a.m. From inside the vehicle, he heard a child crying and assumed it was his brother visiting with his kids. But when he stepped outside to check, no one was there, and the car had already driven off. A tourist vacationing on the island shared another observation. Around 11:30 a.m., while sitting in a car with a friend at the Queen Elizabeth Lookout, they noticed a white car parked nearby. Inside, a man and a woman sat in the front seats, maintaining a noticeable distance from each other, seemingly locked in a heated, tense argument. Another witness, an employee at the local golf club, provided a chilling detail. Near the club lies a cemetery, and shortly after 11:30 a.m. that day, he heard a woman scream echoing from the direction of the cemetery, lasting about 30 seconds. Alarmed, the golf club staff rushed to investigate, but upon arrival, they found only silence, no signs of anything amiss. Based on this lead, police scoured the stretch of Rudy Hill Road mentioned by the witness. There, they discovered a pair of shattered sunglasses. Comparing them to a photo Janelle's parents had taken of her the day before the murder, police confirmed the sunglasses belonged to her. Piecing together the clues, investigators theorized that Janelle was attacked on Rudy Hill Road, and her body was later dumped in the grassy area near the Cockpit Waterfall tourist site. Tragically, at 3:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, a torrential downpour swept across Norfolk Island, and Janelle's body wasn't discovered until 6:15 p.m. The relentless rain washed away critical evidence, complicating the collection of forensic traces. Nevertheless, the black plastic tarp wrapped around Janelle's body yielded 10 distinct fingerprints. That day, the island was home to over 2,200 people, including residents and tourists. Police requested fingerprints and DNA samples from everyone, but only 1,200 individuals complied. After cross-referencing, they found a match for one set of fingerprints belonging to Steve Cochran, a local construction contractor. Steve was promptly summoned for questioning. He quickly provided an alibi, proving he was nowhere near the crime scene at the time of the murder. Further investigation confirmed Steve had no contact, conflicts, or personal ties with Janelle. Additionally, his construction work frequently involved the same type of black plastic tarp found at the scene, explaining the presence of his fingerprints. After thorough verification, Steve was cleared as a suspect. Police shifted their focus to Janelle's personal relationships. Surprisingly, they uncovered that she had been romantically involved with a married man who exhibited extreme possessiveness, and had once confronted his wife at a bar in a jealous rage. Moreover, police discovered a diary hidden under Janelle's pillow in her bedroom, detailing her life on the island. After moving to Norfolk, Janelle began a relationship with a widower 20 years her senior and moved in with him. However, the relationship deteriorated rapidly. Janelle clashed with his 4 children, leading to intense conflicts. After their breakup, the man reportedly spat on her in contempt. The diary also mentioned another man Janelle dated for several months, who had briefly proposed marriage. When he later called it off, they parted ways. A month before the murder, the two had a heated argument that escalated into physical violence. When questioned, the man admitted to the relationship and the altercation, but insisted he had no intent to harm Janelle. He provided an alibi and was temporarily ruled out as a suspect. However, the diary revealed another story, dating back to Janelle's early days on Norfolk Island. Upon arriving, she befriended a woman named Susan Fields. Since Janelle lacked stable housing at the time, Susan kindly arranged for her to stay temporarily at a neighbor's home. But Janelle's behavior soon wore on those around her. Her late-night drinking and loud music created constant tension. On one occasion, when a neighbor was on the phone at midnight, Janelle stormed over, snatched the phone, smashed it, and shouted that their conversation was disturbing her sleep. She further alienated others by falsely accusing Susan of an illicit affair with the neighbor. Unable to tolerate her actions, Susan and the neighbor evicted Janelle within a week. The diary documented conflicts with numerous individuals, including 16 men Janelle had encountered. Police meticulously investigated each one, but all were cleared of involvement in the murder. To catch the killer, authorities offered a substantial reward, but the case stalled, becoming an unsolved mystery haunting Norfolk Island. 2 years later, while reviewing old files, an investigator stumbled upon a record containing fingerprints collected shortly after Janelle's murder, tied to a separate theft on the island. At the time, police had apprehended the thief, but failed to enter his fingerprints into the database. The investigator decided to input them now. After some time, the system flagged a match. The fingerprints corresponded to one of the 10 sets found on the black tarp wrapping Janelle's body. This breakthrough led police to a suspect, Glenn McNeil, a New Zealand chef. 2 years before the murder, Glenn had moved to Norfolk with his girlfriend, marrying her just over a year later. They purchased a house and a car on the island, but their marriage quickly unraveled. 2 months after Janelle's murder, Glenn divorced his wife and returned to New Zealand alone. There, he remarried, had 2 children, and rebuilt his life. When investigators visited Glenn's former residence on the island, a neighbor pointed to a dusty, rusted Honda Civic parked outside, noting it was the car Glenn had abandoned before leaving. Glenn McNeil's Honda Civic, covered in dust and rust, bore mysterious dents. Upon inspection, investigators found shattered glass fragments and a black plastic tarp inside. Analysis revealed the glass-matched fragments found on Janelle's body, likely from a broken wine bottle. Strikingly, the white paint on Janelle's body shared the same chemical composition as the car's paint. In the trunk, police discovered traces of blood and human hair, which DNA testing confirmed belonged to Janelle. These clues painted a damning picture of the crime, leaving the perpetrator with little room to maneuver. With Glenn now residing in New Zealand, Australian police coordinated with New Zealand authorities to request his extradition. 4 years after the murder, Glenn was brought back to Norfolk Island. Astonishingly, upon facing the police, he immediately confessed to being the killer. In his initial statement, Glenn claimed that on the day of the murder, he was driving to the beach. While lighting a cigarette, he dropped it on the floor. As he bent to retrieve it, he lost focus and struck a pedestrian. Janelle panicked by the accident. Glenn, unsure of what to do, placed Janelle in his trunk and drove home. While grappling with how to cover up the incident, he heard noises from the trunk, indicating Janelle was still alive. In a frenzy, he grabbed a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her once. But this account was swiftly debunked. The autopsy revealed 64 stab wounds on Janelle's body. Furthermore, clear evidence showed she had fought back fiercely, with numerous defensive wounds on her hands and body. When pressed about the glass fragments, paint traces, and Janelle's torn clothing, Glenn could offer no coherent explanation. Finally, police presented forensic photos of Janelle's body. Overwhelmed, Glenn broke down and revised his confession. He admitted that when he opened the trunk and saw Janelle still alive, he panicked, grabbed the knife, and stabbed her repeatedly. Janelle, still strong enough to raise her hands to fend off the brutal attack. After stabbing her multiple times, Glenn wrapped her body tightly in a black plastic tarp and placed it back in the trunk. He then drove to the cockpit waterfall area and discarded her body in the nearby grass. Despite Glenn's confession, the police remained skeptical of his account. The most glaring contradiction was this. If he had accidentally hit Janelle with his car, why didn't he take her to a hospital for treatment? Instead, he brutally killed her in a manner that defied any claim of panic or accident. Glenn's statements were riddled with inconsistencies, lacking logic and credibility. He claimed to be tormented by guilt, even admitting to multiple failed attempts at self-harm, only to be stopped by others who intervened. During the investigation, a former colleague of Janelle's named Tracy provided a crucial lead. Tracy recalled that on the day of the murder, she was working at a hotel near the road where Janelle disappeared. After her shift, as she left through the back exit, she vaguely saw a woman assaulting another woman. The victim was wearing white athletic shoes and was screaming in terror. The assailant was Alyosha Taylor, Glenn's ex-wife. When Tracy appeared, Alyosha emerged from the bushes, her clothing stained with suspicious red marks. When asked if she was injured, Alyosha coldly replied that it was merely paint on her shirt. About 20 minutes later, Tracy spotted Glenn standing beside a white car in the hotel's rear parking lot. Notably, just 2 weeks before the murder, Janelle had approached Tracy, asking whether Alyosha worked at the hotel, inquiring about her personality, and probing for details about Glenn. Tracy found this odd, and asked why Janelle was so interested in the couple, but Janelle brushed it off and changed the subject. After the murder, Alyosha sought out Tracy. She asked if it was true that Tracy had witnessed something that night, as rumors were circulating on the island. Tracy denied seeing anything and insisted she had no knowledge of the events. Their conversation turned to Janelle's death, and Alyosha proposed a theory. Janelle had been deliberately run over because she had crossed certain people on the island. Police immediately sought to question Alyosha, but she had left the island after divorcing Glenn and relocated to the United Kingdom. Her current whereabouts remain unknown. In February 2007, the Janelle Patton case went to trial at the Norfolk Island Supreme Court. A jury of 12, 5 women, and 7 men was selected. Mid-trial, 1 juror withdrew due to health issues. Replacing them would have been time-consuming, so the judge, exercising discretion under the law, allowed the 11-member jury to proceed with the verdict. At trial, the prosecution argued that Glenn McNeil had placed Janelle's body in his car trunk. In his Honda Civic, they found blood, human hair, paint traces, and glass fragments matching those on Janelle's body. Most critically, Glenn's fingerprint was found on the black plastic tarp wrapping her body, a piece of evidence deemed pivotal. However, the defense swiftly countered. They pointed out that the tarp bore 10 fingerprints, only one of which matched Glenn's, while another belonged to a construction worker already cleared as a suspect. The remaining 8 were unidentified. The defense argued it was implausible for Glenn to have handled such a large tarp using just one finger. The blood in the trunk was minimal, too scant, they claimed, for a crime of this magnitude. Moreover, forensic reports couldn't definitively confirm the blood belonged to Janelle. Additionally, DNA found under Janelle's fingernails belonged to an unidentified woman, not Glenn. This same DNA was also detected on a cigarette but near the crime scene. These details sparked doubts. Was Glenn truly the killer, or could a woman be the real culprit? The deliberate slashing of Janelle's undergarments suggested a staged sexual assault to mislead investigators. Remarkably, during the trial, Glenn abruptly retracted his earlier confessions. He insisted he had never encountered Janelle that day, claiming his prior statements to police were fabricated under stress, and that he could no longer recall what he had said. The defense added that Glenn was a heavy drug addict, recently released from a psychiatric facility before his arrest, and may have been delusional or coerced during interrogations, rendering his confessions unreliable. After 5 grueling months, the 11-member jury reached a unanimous decision. The court convicted Glenn McNeil of murder, sentencing him to 24 years in prison. Yet, even after the trial, public skepticism persisted, particularly regarding the unidentified woman whose DNA was found under Janelle's fingernails. Among the doubters was Brian Bruce, a renowned New Zealand documentary filmmaker. While researching the case, Brian secretly met with Glenn for a conversation. There, Glenn shared an entirely different story. He was not the killer. The true culprits, he claimed, were a reclusive couple on the island who grew illegal plants. Glenn had once damaged their crops, drawing their ire. On the day of the murder, the couple confronted him at his home, demanding compensation. Unable to pay, Glenn was forced into their car, unaware of their destination. Along the way, he saw Janelle walking on the road. To his shock, the couple claimed Janelle was an undercover police officer sent to monitor their activities. To eliminate her, they deliberately struck her with their vehicle, placed her in the trunk, took her to their home, and killed her. To cover up the crime, the couple threatened Glenn, ordering him to deal with Janelle's body or face the annihilation of his family. This tale, however, strained credulity. When Glenn later appealed his conviction, the court rejected his request. Ultimately, he admitted the story was a fabricated ploy to lessen his sentence. While incarcerated, Glenn offered Brian Bruce yet another version of events. He claimed that on the morning of the murder, he was home recovering from a cold. Around noon, the couple arrived in their truck, demanding he help dispose of Janelle's body. They leveraged his earlier vandalism of their illegal crops, threatening his family's lives if he refused. When Glenn approached their truck, he found Janelle lifeless. When he asked what to do, they replied, "That's up to you." So, Glenn transferred Janelle's body to the trunk of his Honda Civic, wrapping it in a black plastic tarp. Initially, he didn't wear gloves, accidentally leaving a fingerprint on the tarp. He then donned white rubber gloves, completed the wrapping, and drove off. Unsure of what to do, he chose the busy cockpit waterfall area, believing the body would be quickly discovered. He also revealed burying the gloves under grass near his bedroom window. Their conversation was cut short due to prison phone time limits. Brian Bruce later collaborated with police to review phone records. They found that the couple had called Glenn 5 days before the murder, but he didn't answer. The day before the murder, Glenn called them back for a 51-second conversation. In the 6 days following the murder, he made 4 more unanswered calls to them. On the 9th day, the couple called Glenn for a 40-second exchange. While these calls didn't prove the couple's guilt, they hinted at a shadowy connection with Glenn like a carefully guarded secret. Notably, the couple's Mazda truck had a front logo that, upon impact, could have caused a wound matching a distinctive injury on Janelle's body. 9 years after the murder, police searched Glenn's former home for the white rubber gloves he mentioned, but found nothing. A friend of Janelle's later provided a bombshell. Janelle and Glenn actually knew each other. They often met, chatted, and drank together in the evenings. When asked why this wasn't disclosed during the initial investigation, the friend explained that police never inquired about their relationship. The Janelle Patton case was a rare event in Norfolk Island's centuries-long history, sending shockwaves through its small community. Some residents even claimed they knew the trial's outcome beforehand. After the verdict, an anonymous juror confided, "We knew he didn't do it. We knew who the real culprit was, but we won't say. So we wanted him freed." Forensic reports suggested multiple perpetrators may have been involved. Over a decade into his sentence, Glenn remains behind bars, and the case is still clouded by unresolved mysteries. The unidentified woman's DNA under Janelle's fingernails, the role of the couple growing illegal crops, and the islanders' whispers of a buried truth all form pieces of an unfinished puzzle. On an island once deemed a paradise, Janelle Patton's death remains an open wound, haunting those who know her story. And so, one life was lost, one man was imprisoned, and others stayed silent. On that small island, justice may have been overshadowed by fear, by secrets everyone knows but no one dares voice. The case, seemingly closed with a conviction, has opened a floodgate of doubts, that the truth might not lie in legal files, but in the hearts of those who silently know far more than they've ever revealed. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.